2 years. You never thought we would shift gears to a different investigative strategy, but we have.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Hey guys, so that was quite a long time ago, and we were actually dealing with Keegan Kline at the time. We will go back into that video. So yeah, breaking news in terms of this case as well, shortly after the Kristen Smart case. And one of the key questions we want to ask is what led the authorities to Richard Allen, right? What led authorities to him? He's also known as Ricky Allen, is 50 years old. And I must say that is an image that is quite crazy, isn't it? This whole thing of, can you see what's going on in the background there? Let's bring it up. So that's Richard Allen. That's actually his wife next to him. And there is a familiar picture. The suspect in the DELPHI murders, and not I think, the best sketch, not one of the better sketches. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but you very seldom see Richard Allen smiling, and here he seems to have a slight smile on his face. If you've gone through the social media of his daughter, you'll actually notice that he doesn't seem to smile in any of the pictures, and in fact he seems quite camera shy. And you would imagine that if this is the guy, if this is the person that they've been looking for, and we don't want to make the mistake of assuming 100% certainty that it is, because he's actually at least suspect number 7, right? We're going to kind of go through the line of the suspects, but we've been here before, but this does feel different, doesn't it? And speaking of which, I see that you voted in the poll, and 81% at this point seem to think that Richard Allen is Bridge Guy, right? 7% say Keegan Kline, 5% say Ron Logan, 7% say someone else, but by far the majority say Richard Allen. But if it is Richard Allen, how did they find him? How is he linked to this case, if at all, right? So SW Firefly says, I'm holding on to my vote until the press conference. Pretty in Pink says the family confirmed on a Facebook post. Yeah, well, there's definitely there's no doubt that there's strong reason to believe that this is different. But the question is, how was Richard connected, right? How did they make the connection? And what is the connection? You could say he's connected because he's an accessory, or he knows something. Or similar to the Kristen Smart case, you could even say, as in the case of his father was implicated, allegedly implicated, because of, did he help bury Kristen Smart? You could actually have an indirect link as well. But something that I've seen that I haven't been able to get confirmation of is a $20 million bond. Has anyone else seen that anywhere? I'm trying to find a source for that. Scott Rayburn says, never giving up on a case and taking all the downfalls and hard work that goes. Yeah, they keep digging. America True Crime says, I feel as if he knew they would be at the bridge. Okay. Mel Stiller says, wasn't the guy who supposedly found the girls? Well, that's what this case is about. That's what we're sort of looking into. So we're going to look at some video I think maybe that's a good place to start. I'm going to play you guys some video, and what I want to show you is how camera shy he is. So if you think about that, and it is kind of looking through a keyhole, if you just think about what you've just seen there, it does repeat through a lot of the other footage I've seen, and I haven't really had a lot of time to study this, and you need a lot more time, but based on what I have seen, the Red X crime files, thanks a lot for that. Glad you could make it. Welcome. So just a quick welcome to everyone. Run the World. Is it true that he had a fake social media account that linked him to this? Social media is definitely one possibility. We're going to examine some of the others. Hybrid Pisces says, what was the motive? I'm still curious about that. We are going to touch on that. So I have thought that far. We are going to touch on that. SM Kovalinsky, good to see you. Thanks a lot for what you've sent me as well. In fact, SM Kovalinsky sent me video footage of, I think it's a fairly young Richard Allen walking. And it's quite interesting to see that. So we'll look at that. Terry Dean, good to see you. Wolfie, Leah Simpson, Nisi, Celeste, all of you guys, good to see you. So yeah, the thing I want to kind of impress upon you guys is it's the same thing with this particular image. You may kind of think that there's a you could argue that this is duping delight. You could argue that Richard Allen thinks it's quite amusing that he knows what's going on in that picture. It could also be the opposite, that he really doesn't want to be part of selfies, right? Imagine if it's you. Imagine if you've committed a crime and there's actually video footage of you. Not only that, there's also your voice, right? And do you then want photos of yourself out there that people are going to potentially link? Remember, every time your photo appears, let's say in social media, it's an opportunity for anyone to kind of think, wow, I just saw something in the news. Could you be that guy? So if you are a perpetrator, you would rather have 0 images of yourself, right? And think about other things as well, facial recognition, all that kind of thing. That's another possibility here, is that facial recognition is so advanced that that technology started pointing things in a particular direction. Do I think that that's what happened here? No, I don't think the quality of that video was sufficient for that, although it was perhaps sufficient for voice recognition and potentially kind of gait recognition, right? The other aspect that I think one can sort of look at is just in general, you can tell the build of the person from Bridge Guy. You can tell there's a kind of a build going on, quite a heavy set person, right? And then basically just go through the possibilities. Someone who is male, heavy set, tends to wear a hat, right? And you can see he doesn't have a lot of hair, and he is often wearing a hat. In fact, in my background image, you can see him wearing a cap, and he often is. So who in the community tends to dress like that, is male, is heavy set, right? Anyway, we're going to come back to motive and how this could have been linked to begin with. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Yes, so no social media. That would actually make sense. Have you guys seen this image? Let me see if I can bring it up. I want to show it to you kind of without showing it to you, if that makes sense. Have you guys seen this image? That is actually his daughter, Kathy Allen. That's from Facebook, and it was taken on the 5th of July, 2018, so barely a year and 3-4 months after the actual crime. Look where that photo has been taken. So as you can see, I've blurred out the face, and that's part of why it took quite a long time to come on, is I do feel, do you want to victimize his family? If he committed this crime, you want to victimize his family by showing their faces. I'm sure a lot of people will do that, and I personally just think one's got to be careful with that, because these are potentially innocent victims, right? I know a lot of the rest of social media may not care about that. I do care about that. I don't want to be also a perpetrator, right? In other words, a crime has been committed and then you actually aggravate it, you add insult to injury. But this is quite kind of amazing, is you can imagine, did he not see this image, right? This is his daughter, right? And it gives you a sense also of, I don't want to call it small world, but it's a small, it's all within the same fabric. They lived in the area, they are in the area. His daughter is now within meters of where there's a crime scene, his own daughter. His daughter's, I don't want to say similar age, but not that much older than the victims, right? So the other thing is, if Richard is the man that committed this crime, he also walked exactly where his daughter's sitting right there. It feels very, I don't know, in a way it's not surprising, but in another way it's chilling, isn't it? Yeah, I've got to say, when you look at the eyes, you do, I think I'm going to, not so much in that image, but we're going to look at another image. When you look at the eyes, they do seem to speak volumes. Let me see if I can bring that up. This one. Nisi's, sorry, SW5 says he looks like the police sketch. Do you guys agree with that? So there are a couple of police sketches. I don't think he looks like the younger version of that sketch. But it does make you wonder what is in those eyes and what is in that mind as well. What have those eyes seen? But also, in that moment, do you think he wants to be photographed? Once again, he's not smiling, right? You get the feeling that he's camera shy. Zircon said, I thought he matched the sketch. Nisi says a mixture of both. Run the World says, I think the one with the hat is pretty similar. Okay, so let's have a look at one of those sketches. Guys, I've got to apologize if I'm a little fuzzy. I'm on double antibiotics. I went to the doctor earlier today, your time, but yesterday, my time. I've got tick bite fever. I've got a slight temperature, and I'm not feeling so great. So if I'm a little bit off my game, that's maybe why. To me, that's not doesn't look like him. That looks much younger than him. But let's have a look at nose and mouth. Let's have a look. And eyes and eyebrows. Okay. The nose seems a little bit bigger than in the sketch. The shape of the jaw looks right, doesn't it? I don't know whether the hair is right though. But it does look the eyes definitely, with that line of the eyes, that is definitely similar. Look at that. The line of the eyes is definitely similar. The nose has kind of a bulb over here. The lips are quite straight. The jaw, the symmetry of the jaw, that part isn't accurate, and I think he is older. But let's have a look at that video again and compare it to the sketch. So there you can see he's got more hair, and it is kind of curly, right? Obviously, he was younger at that point. Okay, so that's that sketch. Let's have a look at the other one. So as I'm sitting here, I do have a slight fever. I do have a slight headache. I'm feeling quite sort of weak. So yeah, I'm a little bit off my game. So yeah, there we have the other one, the other sketch. Let's bring it up to full screen. And basically, if you look at this, it's referring to what appears to be the same person, a younger version and an older person. And there's some facial hair. I think there seems to be some facial hair in the bridge guy video. This nose is better, I think. It's a better execution of the nose. Got that sort of bulbous part there. And then the eyes and eyebrows, I think the eyebrows are better in this one, but the eyes are slightly better in that one. That line across the eyes, the eyebrows are better. Let's go back. I must say the eyes do say a lot, don't they? And the sort of blank expression. Terry, I am on like double antibiotics, so I must say I had a couple of gin and tonics, and they really hit me hard. I think when you're on antibiotics, alcohol has another sort of level in a way. Okay, so let's go through a couple of issues. So first of all, I suppose you could say, is this déjà vu? Are we going through the same thing again, right? I don't think we are. But I think we need to be, nevertheless, be careful. And we need to address this question of, we need to address the question of if this is the person, then how do you actually connect him? How is he connected, or how did they find him? And I think there's kind of two ways to think about it in a very broad way. The one is he connected to them in a sense of DNA evidence at the crime scene, or some evidence trail leading back to him from the crime scene? I would suspect not. It's very early to say, but I would suspect otherwise they would have found him right in the beginning, right? I suspect it's the other way around, that the evidence trail is something like the same situation in the Paul Flores case, which is that it's not that his evidence is found somewhere else, but their evidence, the evidence of the girls, is found on his property, potentially. And if that's the case, then in other words, he's connected to them because they are on his property, right? In other words, so one thing that we do know is that there was a lot of blood at the crime scene, which suggests that there was a lot of bloody clothing, which could mean that clothing was buried in a yard. And if that clothing was dug up and they tested that clothing for DNA and they found their DNA, right, on his clothing, then that would link them to him. Does that make sense? I think you often tend to think, how are we going to link somebody else to the crime scene? But it also works in the other way. But the question is still, how did you know to go and dig in that yard? And it could be something like, let me put it this way. If you imagine that bridge, let's see if I can bring up an image of the bridge. So, yeah, as you saw, I haven't actually blurred out all the images, but I think it's a matter of fact that someone is married to someone else, and that is known. But I do think one's got to be careful protecting, especially younger people, such as his daughter. In any event, let's have a look at this image. Now, what I'm trying to get at is, do you focus your search on the crime scene area? So if you imagine the bridge being the way that you think about how you solve this crime, and obviously it's easier to do this in hindsight, but do you focus your efforts on the far side of the bridge where the crime scene is, or the other side, which is where the killer comes from? And we'll deal with that in a moment. Or do you deal with the guy walking on the bridge, right? And I think obviously you deal with all of those at a certain point. I think at some point you fixate on the crime scene, you get all the evidence you possibly can from the crime scene. And I think law enforcement got to a point where they couldn't really get any further than that, right? In other words, they'd investigated the crime scene. I'm speculating here because I don't know what's going to come out in a press conference, but it would make sense that because it took 5 years to investigate this case up until this point, longer than 5 years, it would make sense that the evidence they found at the crime scene got them only so far, and then no further. Then you would look at things like digital data, so things like the video, the audio, that sort of thing, and then take that as far as you can. And look how far that took you. And what was so frustrating with this case was you had what appeared to be video of the perpetrator, which is the holy grail in true crime. I mean, almost, well, let's put it this way, almost the holy grail in true crime. The only thing holier than that is video of an actual crime being committed. I mean, you can't get better evidence than that, right? So this is really close to that. Video, but slightly out of focus, slightly grainy video. Audio, but not a lot of audio, although it seems like the police may have had more audio than we know about. But then that only got them to a certain point. So you kind of feel like even with the video and the audio and the gate and the crime scene evidence, it didn't really get you to a point where you could make an arrest, certainly not for 4 or 5 years, almost going on to 6 years. So then what about the other side, which is you go to where the girls lived, right? You go to that side of the bridge and you start looking over there, right? Yeah, I know Grey Hughes did do a show in Delphi around lunchtime. I know about that. But do you guys follow what I'm saying? So we're talking about how do you connect, or how is Richard Allen connected to this? And what I'm trying to say is it doesn't look like the crime scene itself was sufficient. Again, we don't know exactly what's in that. It also looks like the sketches also didn't quite get you there, and the video also didn't quite get you there. So that's still not connecting you. So then what does connect you, right? You are a hardcore skeptic. So what I'm trying to say is you then go from that part of the bridge to the other side, which is where the girls live, right? Just want to have a look at some of your comments. Zircon says, I think doggies were the key. Mandy says the sketch and photo are spot on. If they were, it nevertheless didn't solve the crime. I mean, you have the same in the Madeleine McCann case. I think there's quite a good sketch, but it's not like, well, that's the person. It's easy to say afterwards that that's the person. Bren Manock says maybe, I'm not sure who you mean by CP. Do you mean that podcast? Okay. Kelly says the girl's name is Liberty, and what is the other girl's name? Abby. Abby and Libby. Yeah, so that's really the answer. So if you went to the crime scene and you investigated that and you had this archive of evidence, but that didn't get you anywhere. I don't know what DNA they found. I mean, the crime scene itself has been very kept under wraps. Also, the autopsies kept under wraps. So that's made this case very frustrating to investigate for someone like me. But one assumes that whatever they got wasn't sufficient. Same with what happened on the bridge. And so what do you do with that then? Well, you leave that and then you go back to where Libby and Abby lived. You go to their neighborhood, right? And then you start looking there. And that's what I think ultimately how they started connecting things. Just my theory, I could be wrong. So let's go to Whiteman Drive in Delphi. Let's bring this up. Okay. Can you guys see that? So I'm just going to get a sense of where this is, right? So it's in Indiana, basically on the eastern side of the USA, right? And what you're seeing there with that pin is the home of Richard Allen, and there's a river. Trailhead Park. Just trying to think where the bridge is. Is the bridge somewhere here? So there's the Old State Road. Let's follow it. It's not that one. So I thought this would be a lot easier to navigate. Thought it'd be a lot easier to navigate. I'm trying to find that bridge. There it is. There it is. Okay. So it's basically from. There it is. Okay. So I was going the wrong way. Okay. So that's the home of Richard Allen, and the distance to that bridge is really not far away. It's basically maybe a mile and a half as the crow flies. But the fact that you see images like, where is that image? The fact that you see images like that already tells you that this is their neighborhood. This is their sort of backwoods. It makes sense that his daughter was photographed there because it's in the fabric of their community, right? So if you take that a little bit further and you say, what if you look at the idea of bridge guy and you just say, well, this is where Abby and Libby live, and now let's make kind of a bubble around that, and let's look at all the men that are, let's say, I don't know, 18 to 50. It's not a very old guy and it's not a teenager. So let's look at that sort of thing. And then let's look at somewhat heavy set men and just go through all of that. Couldn't be that hard to do because it's not a very big community. The thing is, as simple as that sounds, it's easy to come to this in hindsight and say, don't look on the far side of the bridge because you could look for suspects there as well. Look on the other side of the bridge, which is where the girls live and maybe the perpetrator lives. Do you see how the psychology changes? Wolfie says, oh my gosh, I wonder if his daughter knew them. Kelly B says, I wouldn't want my picture taken there, that bridge. Well, now definitely not. Yeah, so that's also a good point. How many miles from the bridge did he live and work? But obviously it's very familiar. It's a very familiar area to them, right? Okay. So we are going to deal with this idea of motive. We'll deal with that in a second. He was about 45 years old. Yeah, that's exactly right. Charles says follow the train tracks. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that I just wanted to establish that just how close he lived to the crime scene, but on that side of the bridge. And have you guys been able to confirm a $20 million bond? Somebody said that, and I just haven't been able to confirm that. Have any of you seen that there's a $20 million bond out there? Jocelyn says 5 miles walking distance from his house, from the crime scene. Yeah, yeah, it does look like it is about that far. It's about, looks like barely 1 or 2 miles to the, but as the crow flies, from the house to the bridge. Five minutes, yeah. I thought 5 miles was a little far. It's not quite 5 miles. Have any of you seen anything about a 20 million bond? Someone said that, I just haven't been able to confirm it. Melon says that's what I heard, 20 million. 2 miles to a house, yeah. So I don't actually have the, I would have liked a little bit more time to prepare for this, but I don't actually have the addresses of Abby and Libby. Do any of you guys know those addresses offhand? Just the street name, so we can link the address of Richard Allen to them. I know they were from Delphi, but I don't actually know it sort of offhand. I'm definitely not an expert on this case. Thanks a lot, Jennifer. I don't think the sketches were a ruse. I think they were trying quite hard to get the right sort of sketch. Okay. If you look at this image, and I don't really mean to have his wife in this image, but I think it's, you know, it's going to be difficult not to. The fact is, he is married, and I think she is going to have to deal with some of this publicity. But if you look at where they are in these images, it's the fabric of not necessarily the crime scene, but that whole sort of woods area. And doesn't it feel like so many crimes we've dealt with lately are to do with woods in the outdoors? You know, Kylie Rodney, Gabby Petito, wasn't there another one as well where we were just dealing with kind of woods? Debbie Collier, right? Seems like there's quite a lot of trees and wood, and that is part of the fabric of a lot of crime, high profile crime scenes of late. But even other crimes like Casey Anthony, Kaylee's in the woods, right? White Man Drive. Yeah, but that isn't that where he lived? I'm looking for where they lived. Yeah, Summer's in a very woodsy place as well. It kind of gives you the sense that the woods, like when you think about fairy tales, that there are monsters in the woods. Well, there are monsters in the woods. Terry says, I don't know the addresses, but I did see on a map, and they're very close, like a triangle. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Abby lived by the road under the bridge. Okay. Libby lived in a development closer to Freedom Bridge. So should we go back to that map? Where is it? As I say, I'm sorry that I'm a bit fuzzy. I'm on double antibiotics. I've just woken up as well. So if I'm a little bit off my game, sorry about that. Okay, let's just have a look at where I think I need to bring that up. Okay. So there's the bridge. There are quite a few schools around there. There's Delphi Community Elementary School. There's a middle school. There's a healthcare campus. So when I have a look at some of your comments, Mel, I'm taking antibiotics for tick bite fever. They are like double antibiotics, so they are quite strong. Thanks, Scott. Kathleen Lackman says, why does anyone do a horrible crime? We're going to deal with that. I guess we could sort of deal with it now. So let's kind of deal with that right now. So what do you guys think is the motive in this case? What do you think the motive is in this particular case? Any thoughts on that? Kelly has some addresses in chat above. Thanks a lot for that, Terry. Okay. Kelly and Git looks like. Okay. Where's Kelly? Kelly. I'm looking for Kelly. Still can't find it. Kelly says 20 million bond. Okay. I can't find those addresses. Sorry, I don't know what I'm not seeing. Brent Mannock says motive is sexual. Sarah says sexually motivated. Thanks, Leah. Red X Crime File says sexual. SW Firefly says just the opportunity arose. Scott Rabin says, I think fantasy is definitely an element. It's definitely an element. Okay, so I've got one address here. I think I'm going to see if I can find it. 2090 North 625. I think I need to just move this here. See if we can locate that. So if that's correct, I would love to be able to kind of verify this myself, but this looks like one of the girls lived in that sort of area, and it looks like it was 2 minutes away. And one does wonder if she went to school by bicycle or something, would he have seen her in the same way? If you think about the Eliza Fletcher case, right? You had someone who was a cleaner who probably saw Eliza jogging by quite often, not one time and then he did something one time. He probably saw her several times at the same time and then made up his mind, had a thought, entertained that thought, fantasized about that thought. So it started with a feeling, which became a thought. Then he gave voice to it in some ways. He may have internalized a thought, I want to do this, and then it led to an action, right? Probably the same thing happened here, where he saw both girls, or one or both girls, repeatedly, bear in mind he's also taking his daughter to school. So does he not see other girls, some more than others, when he's taking his own daughter to school, right? So is there another address that we can look at? Celeste says on Monday, I hope they will have all the info. Kathleen says it's not always sexual. I think it is sexual in this case. I think it is sexual in this case. I'm not saying it's not to do with power. Sex is often about power, but it's often about sex as well. Okay. If you if another address comes up, just at me so that I can see it. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to be able to see it. Everyone type the addresses again. Oh, so there's the other one. 290 North. I've got that one. Where's the other one? I've got that one in. Where's the other one? I hope I don't sound too demanding. Have you got Libby's address? Kay Lev says Keegan made that statement that he was in the vehicle. Was he with this guy? We don't know anything about that. We don't know about the essay because we don't know what's in the autopsy. So that is an assumption. That definitely is an assumption. But if you think about Eliza Fletcher, what do you think the motive was there and what was ultimately revealed there? You know, it's almost a similar situation. Okay, at last, 3348 West 500. Okay, let's have a look. Let's try and get it. I've got that. I've already got that. 3348 West 500. Okay. Got it. Okay. So that's a little bit further away. Thanks very much for that. Let's do that. Okay. So this is I guess the triangle that we're sort of dealing with. It's not quite a triangle, is it? That's about 9 miles away, but you would imagine that it's also a situation of traveling to school. So again, I'm assuming that's the right address. That is on the other side, in a way, of the bridge, right? The bridge is here. That's on the far side of the bridge. Is that really the right address? Because you would imagine that they lived quite close to one another. I mean, it's not incredibly far. It's 11 minutes away, but it's further than I would have assumed. Is that definitely the right address? Anyway, the point to address here, whether these are the right addresses or not, is this idea of it's 3 people and they share the same fabric. They share the same neighborhood, right? It's not someone from out of town. It's not something random. someone said that this could be a crime of opportunity. I don't think that is the case. I think it's like Eliza Fletcher, someone who saw things happening fairly regularly. So that brings us to motive, right? So I'm going to give you guys a clue, and obviously this is my opinion, based on thin slicing a lot of things. I believe the motive is similar to the Jeffrey Dahmer case. So what inference do you draw from that? If we say the motive is the same as the Jeffrey Dahmer case, what do you think that means? Let's look at some of your comments. Scott says he got excited, started hunting. They lived on opposite sides of the bridge. Often when you're that age, your best friends are kind of neighbors, or they live very close to one another. Unless you've got parents that ferry you around, you know, or you've got a bicycle or something. Someone in chat said that Richard is quite short, only around 5'4". That's also quite important. The bridge guy does look like he's not particularly tall, dark, and handsome, right? Yeah, Terry, you're right. Thank you very much, guys, for that. Thanks a lot for that. Oops, sorry, 3348. I think I've got it as 3348. Okay. Thanks, Leo. Thanks for that. Okay. Does he have a criminal record? I don't know, but it actually looks like he doesn't, which I think has surprised many. But did Jeffrey Dahmer have a criminal record? Actually, I think he did. He just trying to think what he did. Something, wasn't he driving under the influence or something? But he did do something. Let's see what you guys say. Dahmer said he didn't want to. No, that's not what I'm referring to. Songbird says little guy syndrome. Control. Yeah, it's not quite touching on what I'm looking at. Lack of self-esteem, that I think is part of it. If you think about how he never seems to smile. I don't think he's a bad-looking guy. I think he's a fairly ordinary-looking guy, but I think he does have a self-esteem problem. Hedy Lamarr, what does Hedy Lamarr say? No, I'm not talking about cannibalism. No. Zircon says ego. Okay, so as I say, that's the clue. The motive is the same in the Jeffrey Dahmer case. So just think about it in broad strokes. If you know the Jeffrey Dahmer case, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with someone who has difficulty engaging with the person that they're sexually attracted to, or has difficulty having normal relations with the people they're attracted to, right? But more particularly, you are dealing with a deviant. That's basically what you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone who, for whatever reason, is struggling to have someone who is a social misfit, right? Someone who's an outcast in a way, but someone who has social difficulty, right? And so that person then develops a deviant side to themselves. So in lieu of not being able to have natural, normal interactions, they then start having unnatural, abnormal fantasies, which then eventually feelings become thoughts, thoughts become, once entertained, become words in the mind and ideas that are quite reinforced through repeated indulgence, which you saw a lot with Jeffrey Dahmer. He kept having these fantasies. And if you keep basically programming your mind along a certain way, then you ultimately are going to, if you program yourself in a certain way by continually fantasizing about certain things, thinking about certain things, then eventually some people will go down that path. You will then act in the way that you've been thinking about. It's kind of inevitable. Does that make sense? So it's similar in the sense of it being the same sexual deviance that comes out of fantasy that is eventually acted out, right? Thanks, SM Kovalinsky. So if you are thinking about things that are not, that, let's just say, antisocial, more and more and more and more, don't be surprised if you eventually commit a criminal act, right? I remember when I was in high school, I was being bullied, I was being picked on, I was going through a very awful time, I was becoming more and more socially isolated. This is me during high school. And I started reading Stephen King books. And Stephen King books are very dark, and there's a very hardcore evil element to them. And there's a sort of an element of teenagers getting bloody revenge on bullies, right? And I eventually reached a point where I had to say to myself, you need to stop reading these books because you're going down a dark path, right? Some people have the ability to do that, to see that downward spiral, right? And to recognize it and say, this is not good. In other words, to be an adult to your own child, but some people aren't. Some people continue down that path of least resistance, and then that ends in a criminal act. But we are all capable of that. If you don't interfere with that process, you don't interrupt that process, then that's where it's going to lead you. So I would also be interested to know what this guy's high school was like, his education, his parents, all that sort of thing. Casey's Dharma developed social skills. Not in a intimate relationship sense. I mean, he didn't want someone to touch him. He wanted to be in total control. So he was still struggling with anxiety, right? Okay, so let me flesh this out a little bit. In the movie Silence of the Lambs, have you guys seen that movie? Hannibal provides a kind of a truism where he says, how do we begin to covet? So first of all, have you seen that movie? And what do you think I'm driving at here? We're still talking about motive, right? How do we begin to covet? Musafi says his wife is very outgoing, confident, social, and well-connected socially. Absolutely, right? You covet by what is near you, what you see every day, right? What you see every day. It's something that you see, and then it's in your mind, and then you start to imagine scenarios, and you start to have fantasies. Remember with Jeffrey Dahmer, he saw a jogger running by in his own neighborhood, and the jogger was running, I think, without a shirt on. And this really excited him, right? And then he started having fantasy. So he's having a theoretical framework develop, which he then entertains and plots and plans, right? But he's starting to wire his mind. So in other words, it's fantasy and reality that are starting to mix together. So the jogger runs by, that's in real life, and then he has a fantasy about it that's not real life. But then somewhere along the line, that fantasy and real life link up. And the thing I'm suggesting is that didn't the same thing happen here, where you had a fabric where someone was having fantasies and someone was, what's the word, leaning towards a particular kind of deviancy. And within that fabric, certain people were moving in and out of his just can't think of words, environment. And so just like the jogger in Jeffrey Dahmer. And so within this situation, he starts to notice two girls, or one girl in particular. We don't know if it's definitely two people. It could be one of them, could be both of them, one more than the other. But he starts to notice them and then starts to imagine things, and then eventually he recognize an opportunity? That's kind of the question. I don't think it just happened one day, and I think there's probably, if you go to his computers at home, you're probably going to find pornography, a certain kind of pornography. There's something supplying that kind of fantasy, and so by the time he actually commits the crime, it's almost inevitable for him. For everybody else, it's a big shock and it's unexpected, but for him, it's not. And the reason I've got this image behind me of the two sides of the face is because a lot of us have two lives. You've got the public face and the private face. And sometimes that private face is very private and very secret and very dark. And the bigger the gap between these sides of yourself, the more you are at risk of committing crimes and going to the dark side. If the more congruency there is between your public face and your private face, the more of a healthy, authentic person you are. Let me say that again. The more congruency there is between your public face and your private face, the more authentic you are and the more healthy you are in a certain sense. That's not to say that certain things should be private. Let me give you a silly example. When you go to the bathroom, you should close the door. Certain things should be private. Right? So it's not to say you should have absolutely no difference between your public face and your private face. But if that difference is extremely vast, like it was with Jeffrey Dahmer, then if you've got a very simple way of testing this is if you have a lot of secrets, if you keep a lot of secrets, if you're having a secret relationship, if you've got very secretive fantasies, and that's a very big part of your daily life, that may not be very healthy. And you might be in trouble. And you might need to, in the same way I do say, stop reading Stephen King books. You may need to say to yourself, stop whatever it is, right? Or someone that you know, stop watching violent movies, or stop doing this or that, right? So let's have a look at some of your comments. Do I have a couple of other images to look through here? So something else I just want to bring up is this particular image, which is from Kathy Allen. It's the Alum Cave Trail, right? This was taken in, can't quite see the date there. Is it 2018, September 2018? But it's the same fabric of the crime scene. It is the woods, it's a river, there's water, right? It's the same kind of fabric. I want to see if I can find that Alum Cave Trail and just see where it is in terms of this this map. Alum Cave Trail. I've got an idea. It's actually quite far away. That didn't work. Okay, so that's not really relevant. No, that is far away. But I think let's just show you that quickly. That's quite far away. That's in Tennessee. But the other side to that is it shows that they were people who went hiking and they went into the woods and that they were regularly in nature. And so if you think about it, a lot of criminals use what they know. So think about Chris Watts and the oil infrastructure, right? Let's think about a couple of other cases. Trouble is, we've dealt with quite a few cases where there's a suspicion of a crime, but not necessarily a conviction. Just trying to think of another case. A case that hasn't been proved at this point is the Suzanne Morphew case. And there you've got a situation of a hunter and firearms, and then ask the question, is that relevant, right? If it is, whatever. In the Laurie Vallow case, you've got someone who was literally a grave digger when he was younger, and then 2 sets of human remains are found in his property. Well, was he going back to his gravedigger days? Was he going back to what he knew or not, right? That is often the way that you figure out a lot of these cases, is the job that somebody has often is what they fall back on, their familiarity in terms of how they deal with a crime scene. Jeffrey Dahmer is also a really good example of that, where his father was a chemist. So look how often he used medication, right, to subdue his victims. And then also with his father, the background of what do they call it? Animal husbandry, but you know what I'm talking about. The whole cutting up of animals and that then leading to something else. A lot of that psychology, the psychology that goes into a crime, is the same as the identity of the person. They're not divorced. It's not random. It's part of the same process. Jennifer Wald says, good night, everyone. Sleep well, Nick. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. Taxidermy, that's the word I'm looking for. Kelly says there is no bridge guy. Okay. Not there yet. Says, I love nature. Yeah, Daybell says, Sharon says, Daybell dug his own grave. So do you guys agree with this idea of, in terms of motive, we are what we repeatedly do? Also, how do we begin to covet? Well, we covet what we see every day. Well, what was seen every day by Richard Allen? And also, what was he doing at home every night? And is there a link between those two things? So I don't have confirmation of this. You guys may know this better than I do. As far as I know, his garden was dug up. And one does wonder whether someone in law enforcement was watching the Christian Smart case and thinking, instead of trying to find evidence somewhere else to link it to someone else, you could also find evidence somewhere else and link that to the victims. And isn't that what happened here? So to address the question, how is Richard Allen connected to this case? I think the answer may be that, and again, I couldn't confirm this, which I like to do, but I did, I believe that they dug up his backyard, and I would imagine, knowing what I know about the case, which is admittedly not a lot, that there was a lot of blood at the crime scene, which would suggest bloody clothing, which would suggest burying the bloody clothing. And so maybe the bloody clothing was unearthed in the backyard, and they found Abby and Libby's DNA on that clothing. In other words, it's the same thing with Chad Daybell. You find certain evidence that shouldn't be there, right? You can't link the person to a crime other than in a way by proximity, by, well, what is this person's DNA doing in your backyard, right? When it shouldn't be. Mel Stiller says we covered what we cannot have. That is true. Thanks for your poem, Mel. I saw you wrote a poem. I did. It was passed on to me. Thanks for that. Start at home. Yeah. Wolfie says do a live Monday night after the presser. I'll see about that. I actually wanted to take this weekend off true crime, believe it or not. I just wanted to actually take a complete break from it. Kay says, did they have his DNA from the crime scene? We don't know. It's possible. We just don't know at this point. Yeah, I've seen that. That's a good question, Helena. Do you know how that backyard lead came about? I don't. Does anyone else know? I don't know how that backyard lead came about. So let's have a look at a couple of other images. This is him with his wife, and again, look at the surroundings. Look at again what he's wearing. He's wearing a cap, glasses, not smiling. I think it was Stephanie who said to me, "This is terrifying. This is not some criminal. Can you imagine being this guy's wife, right? Can you imagine being his daughter and finding out that dad is the Delphi killer?" And of course, we don't know 100% whether he is, and it's innocent till proven guilty, and there probably will need to be a trial. But if it is true, can you imagine that? Dad is the Delphi killer. My dad killed someone who is my age. And we were out in the woods with Dad just the other day, or whatever. I mean, imagine the knowledge that my dad is a murderer, and I guess I could have been murdered, right? Your own family member. So it's like this sense of someone who may be living right with you, right under your nose. Someone who's right with you could be, a criminal like this. Also, it could be you if you're not careful. Like I say, if you're going down this path and you don't interrogate that process, it could be you. Because literally what we're talking about here is an ordinary guy, almost like Chris Watts, an ordinary guy who turns out to be something totally different than what everyone thought, right? Not some kind of monster SA person that's got a long criminal record. Someone who's just like part of society, right? Lindsay says, happy that you're covering it. Okay, so I want to quickly deal with all the other suspects before Richard. Not exhaustively, we're just really going to mention their names. Okay, just very briefly. I'm kind of afraid to show other images here because I don't really want to show images of his wife without it being blurred out. But can you imagine being his daughter who's just kind of gotten married? Can you imagine being his daughter's husband or any other family member? Can you imagine what that feels like? So let's deal with a couple of other suspects in July 2019. So basically 2 years into the investigation, Paul Etter was wanted for kidnapping a 26-year-old. He was one of the first suspects investigated in Abby and Libby's murders, but he wasn't. I think he was ultimately excluded. Paul Etter. Then there was Daniel J. Nations. He was arrested in September 2017 in Woodland Park, Colorado, and charged with threatening strangers on a monument trail. He was also a registered, essay kind of guy. So he seemed like quite a good candidate, but he's in Colorado kind of thing. And then I think he fell away as a person of interest. So that's number 2. Then there was Thomas Bruce, who used to be a pastor. He was also charged with 17 felony counts, but I think he was also ultimately excluded. That's number 3. I think he also fit the initial description. He used to wear a flat cap and navy blue jacket. Then there's Charles Eldridge, that's number 4, arrested on January 8, 2019 in Indiana. There are also issues of child this and that. But then I think he was ultimately excluded. But police in Randolph County told the FBI that they thought there could be a link, again, because of a strong resemblance to the suspect's sketch. Is that the 5th one? That's 5 suspects already. Then in just last year, in April last year, there was James Brian Chadwell II. He was kind of named as a suspect as well. That's 6. Sorry, that's actually 5. The 6th one is Anthony Schatz, Keegan Klein. And I have to say that, I don't know about you guys, I thought Keegan Klein was, guys, don't look any further. I think we found our guy, right? He seemed to be the right profile, and he actually had literal contact in terms of Snapchat or Instagram or whatever it was. And he fit the profile in many other ways, right? And that just shows you how you can come so close, but you're still actually not there, right? I mean, how many of us thought that, guys, just arrest him already? It's Keegan Klein, right? And look where we are now in terms of the poll. Only 7% said that you think it's Keegan Klein. 79%, almost 80% say you think it's Richard Allen. Amazingly, 10% still think it could be someone else. But that is right. I think there is a chance that it's not Richard Allen. This could be another Keegan Klein. We'll find out on Monday. We'll definitely find out on Monday. So I'm going to play a little bit from a video I made quite a long time ago, where I said I'm going to give 8 reasons why. What was it? 8 reasons why I guess this is it, kind of thing. Where's that video? 8 reasons why it may be solved at last. Now, I do think you may remember the clip I played right at the beginning. The police said, how long ago was this? It wasn't really that long ago. The police said 10 months ago, we've changed our approach And the way they changed their approach seemed to be something along the lines of, we are looking at social media. And I don't know this for a fact. I don't know whether, how can I put it? The first time they looked for social media or at social media was 10 months ago. I don't know that for a fact. But if that is true, if that was the first time that law enforcement kind of said, let's examine social media as a possibility, then I can only shake my head, because that should have been something they needed to look at on day one. But bear in mind, a lot has changed in 5 or 6 years. This crime happened on February 13, 2017, right? 5 years ago, social media wasn't the animal, the staple of daily life for young and old people that it is today. But going forward, when these crimes happen, one of the first things you need to look at is someone's phone, is their social media, because that's become part of our identity, right? America True Crime says, aren't all serial killers mentally ill? You know, Jeffrey Dahmer was asked that. I think one of the reasons he confessed was he said, I want to find out what is going on with me. And do you think fantasizing is mental illness? Do you think believing in fairy tales is mental illness? It's very similar to mental illness, because it's like being psychotic. It's like having delusions. But I spoke to someone yesterday who believes that, or how can I put it, believes that there's nothing wrong with Russia invading Ukraine, that Russia's the good guys, Ukraine's the bad guys. Is that someone who's mentally ill, or is that delusion? Is that what the influence social media has on divorcing you from reality? And you could say, well, no, you're the one divorced from reality, right? I don't think Dahmer was ill. I think he was someone who had certain fantasies. You could say that he had very serious problems with intimacy. But I think it's such a big mistake to, whenever someone commits a crime, they've got this or that disorder. Because Dahmer himself said, it's not my parents' fault, it's not society's fault, it's not the school's fault. It's not because I had a bad relationship with someone. It's not because I had some operation when I was 4 years old. I did this. And it's refreshing in a way to see someone say that, because that is exactly what is the case. People make a decision, not a disorder. It's not like all within a disorder. By making bad mistakes repeatedly, you end up inevitably going down a certain path. Angela says, but he ate his victims. That was how far he was down that road of fantasy and dysfunction. A simple way for Dahmer to have dealt with everything was just to allow himself to be less isolated, allow himself to have an intimate relationship. And if you watch that, I don't know how this conversation is going over to Dahmer, but there is something sick about this crime. But there's also something every day about it. People have sexual impulses. They can't. It's a kind of a taboo, right? In Dahmer's case, it wasn't really. I mean, or how can I put it? It's maybe he felt it was. That's kind of the most important thing. If you feel it, it's taboo. But in this case, what happened to Abby and Libby was taboo. And so you keep that a secret, but then you should also not continue to indulge in that idea. Dahmer did, and look at what happened. And whoever committed this crime did the same thing, kept indulging in that idea, right? Yeah, what you feed your mind feeds your soul. You know, there's that saying, there are two wolves inside of us. the one that you feed the most is the one that wins. Yeah, so the way that some people say him eating his victim is that's a sign that he's mentally ill. It's a sign that he was extremely, extremely lonely. It's a sign that he was extremely, extremely felt that he had no power or agency in his life. And he felt that he got that power, he got that agency through doing that. And I find it very frustrating that you see those things and people don't make those connections. It's a simple thing that someone was extremely, not just lonely, extremely lonely. So the person who committed this crime against Libby and Abby wasn't someone who just had a few sexual feelings and he acted on them. Someone who had extreme, deviant ideas that he indulged in a lot more than normal. That's the reality of it. It's both. Thought Criminal says, is it fantasy that takes over or the urge? The fantasy feeds the urge, and the urge leads to more fantasy. But if you keep fantasizing, that urge becomes something that you're now programmed with. And if you keep programming the urge, that you gratify the urge, and you keep needing to gratify the urge in a more extreme way, right? If you just compare that to what's happening in true crime, someone who watches a certain kind of, let's say, pornography, deviant kind of pornography, and it becomes more and more shocking, more and more extreme, right? Compare that to people that are watching true crime that are only interested if it's shocking or sensational. Where does that take you eventually? What does that make you eventually, where you are only interested in things that shock you? It's the same kind of programming that's not very good, not very healthy. It's a good question. Melser says, is Richard Allen someone who felt powerless in real life? When you look at pictures of Richard Allen, he doesn't seem to be smiling. He doesn't seem to be thriving. When you look at this video, does this look like someone who is a powerful figure? Let's just play that. Does it look like he's living his best life? That he's living a fairy tale? Do you think he's happy and content and satisfied in his life? So I think I've got another video to play. Let's see if I can bring it up. So this one.
Ready?
I smell it. Smells like summertime.
Peach
on the beach.
on the creek.
You're right.
Oh,
So much better. You gotta start.
Yeah, so again, I don't know, I don't really feel terribly comfortable playing images of his wife because you really want to get images of him there. But it's basically a situation of does he look happy? Does he there he is celebrating? Does he look very happy? And so where is he finding sort of succour? Where is he finding relief from feelings of frustration, feelings of unhappiness, feelings of my life's not very fulfilling? So where does he get that fulfillment? And we kind of have that challenge where it can be quite hard to go the right way to get fulfillment. In other words, you work on yourself. You eat healthy. You exercise. You stay a kind of a balanced person, and you try and meet nice people. But that takes quite a lot of hard work. The harder thing to do the easier thing to do than that is I don't know, you look at pornography, you have unsuitable, inappropriate relationships. In other words, you cheat the project of being alive and being an adult. You find ways to wriggle out of taking some of those things on the chin, right? And ultimately, where does that take you? Yeah, me as well. I'm definitely that applies to me as well. Wishing B said, did one of them have his voice? I want to hear his voice. Yeah, so that's definitely another aspect. Yeah, he doesn't look happy. He definitely doesn't look happy. Masafi says, I feel it helps her. I think she probably wants to crawl under a rock. I think she would probably want to just close her eyes and wish that when she opens them that it's a nightmare that she can wake up from, right? I think she probably doesn't want to see her face in the media. But I feel particularly strongly about trying to put, in terms of true crime, you want to deal with people in certain cases, like in this case. But when you have children that are associated, I really don't think it's fair to them. You basically you create new victims in crime, and I think there are a lot of creators that are very insensitive to that. It is the race to get content, right? I want to get the content before anyone else, and I really don't care about the people I'm putting up. I say I care about them, I care about the victims and so on, but actually you're just trying to put up your content as soon as possible. That's definitely, I think, a problem. I definitely think that is a problem. And I don't want to be part of that problem, to be honest. Sharon says good night. I think it's quite late where you are. Thanks for being with us, Sharon. Snookerman, I felt the same way. What does Snookerman say? Scary that there's so many legit suspects in such a small town. Definitely. But it's also scary, the person who's our latest suspect, who seems like a family man, a nice guy, an ordinary guy. Our suspect now seems like he isn't a suspect. So I'm going to play you something from 10 months ago. Let's see how it plays now. Let's see how it sounds 10 months later with the benefit of hindsight.
Thought we would shift gears to a different investigative strategy, but we have.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The Delphi murder mystery. It's a 4-year-old case. It's the first time I'm ever talking about this case, and I'm going to go through 8 reasons why it may be solved at last. And you heard the Indiana officers saying over there that they've changed strategy. Well, is this the change in strategy? And is it going to be successful? Looking at the digital footprints, looking at the social media.
11 days after the bodies of Liberty German and Abigail Williams were discovered, Indiana cops searched Keegan Anthony Klein's home in Peru. 3.5 years later, Klein was charged with 30 counts, including child exploitation, possession of child pornography, and obstruction of justice. I believe there was a solicitation charge in there as well. The FBI at the time of the search on February 25th, 2017, were focused specifically on the possibility of Klein soliciting underage girls. And what do you think that means? It means doing so online.
So I do think a lot of the issues that we were looking at with Keegan Klein 10 months ago are similar issues that I think come up with Richard Allen. So was Richard Allen soliciting online? What was Richard Allen's online life like, right? And what might be a surprise is there might not really be anything. I'm talking about social media. I wouldn't be surprised if there was social media and then that social media doesn't exist anymore. I wouldn't be surprised. I would be surprised if there's absolutely no social media. I would be surprised with that because it feels like law enforcement went down the social media route recently, and that is what got them to Keegan Klein. And I wouldn't be surprised if it got them to Richard Allen. So literally what could have happened. So if you ask the question, how could a connection have been made between Libby and Abby and Richard Allen? It could be that someone came forward anonymously or whatever and said, these are some of the interactions we had on Instagram or wherever on social media, and these are some of the people that we had them with. One of them was Anthony Schatz, and another one was this guy. And then it turns out this guy wasn't Richard Allen. So that's definitely a possibility. Does that make sense? Thought Criminal says no socials in his own name. That in itself is maybe quite suspicious because who today has no social media? And if you take, and I know this is sounds quite weird, it doesn't sound very scientific, but if you take the fact that he never smiles, he's like got a very deadpan look, and he has no social media, it sort of makes you wonder what's the other side of that face. Is there a secret social media going on? Zircon says, I really think the online ties in with Allen and Klein. So that may have been the breakthrough clue. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Okay, so let's continue watching.
And that is what he turned out to be doing, using Instagram to put up a persona, kind of getting their attention and then migrating them over to Snapchat. So it turned out that he was doing all of this, and now more than a year after being charged, the public has become party to those charges for the first time.
If you look at that particular headline, cops probing Delphi murders are looking for person behind fake account. Well, could they not have been looking at another person behind a fake account? Could they not have been looking at more than one fake account, right? Okay, let's continue.
This also means for the first time, we may have a name and a face to the man on the bridge, to that mysterious figure that appeared somewhat overweight, didn't he? And the man who said down the hill, was this the man who said it? In this episode, we'll examine.
So that was where we were 10 months ago. And if you look at that image, right, you've got a man with a little bit of facial hair, right? And the one thing in that image that I think you'll agree with that is a mismatch. Well, let me ask it in a different way. Let me ask it in a different way. What would you say are the two things that are a mismatch for Keegan Klein, for the sketch? What would you say should exclude him? There are actually three things, I think. Timmy, I'm going to put you down. So, what would you say are three reasons why you wouldn't accept Keegan Klein as a suspect based on those sketches? So, SW Firefly says age, hair, weight. Someone else says height. Okay. So I actually think the number one thing is this. Do you guys agree? The number one thing is hair. His hair and the hair in the sketch is totally different. He's got flat, longish hair. The perpetrator has got sort of curly hair, short, sort of curly hair, right? The other thing is the jawline. He's got quite a distinct jawline in the sketch. It kind of goes kind of like that. In this, he doesn't have a jawline at all. Now, you could argue that he put on weight in prison. I suppose that's something you could say. But that brings us to the third one, weight. He's too heavy, I think, for Bridge Guy. It's someone who's overweight, but not this overweight, right? Do you guys agree that of those three, the hair is actually the biggest thing that's not the same with the sketch? Let's see if I can bring that sketch up again. I don't have it on this. Image. Let's see if I can. Do I have it here? Yeah, it's basically, if you look at that hair, it's definitely not flat hair, and even that hair as well, it's not the same. If you look at that person, it's not a very overweight person, right? It's not a very overweight person. But I remember when we saw Keegan Klein's profile, I thought, well, couldn't he have just put on a lot of weight very quickly? And maybe that sketch is just wrong. But so you don't know. You don't know necessarily what to exclude or what to include. Also, if you look at this image here on the right-hand side, there's not much of a chin, right? There's not much of a chin in that image. And so that does make you think Keegan Klein, because if that one there's a defined chin, that one there isn't really one. So there you go. Okay. Shall we continue with that YouTube video? Oh no. Oh dear. Okay, let's try and get that back on without the ad. I'm not quite sure what happened there. Okay. That's frustrating. That is definitely frustrating. Okay, there we are.
May well be the Delphi killer. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, been any official announcement, but certainly Keegan Klein does seem to fit the profile of the person that we're looking for. And he fits the profile in terms of his social media, but he also fits the profile in terms of general things such as age, race, occupation, and his preoccupations. At 27 years old, Klein is old enough to be too old for the victims.
So what's quite interesting to look at here is also where you say you were wrong. I don't think you got this right? That is part of the critical thinking going on here, is to say, 10 months ago, you were convinced that this was the guy. Well, you were wrong. Right, you're right. I was wrong. Why? What? Where did we go wrong? Right? And again, you've kind of got to maintain, in a way, the scout mindset. You've got to stay curious. Can you imagine if law enforcement also kind of insisted, it's definitely Keegan Klein, we're going to look no further? Well, we wouldn't be at the position we are now. So part of what you want to look at now is, where did our thinking go wrong? And did I express any hesitation, or was I completely convinced that 100% that it's Keegan Klein, right? So it says 8 reasons why it may be solved at last, exclamation mark. Did I express any hesitation anyway? Let's have a look. Yeah, we all hate being wrong. We all hate being wrong. Okay, so let's continue.
He would have been 23 years old at the time the crime was committed, but also young enough to be au fait with social media and hip with the things young kids are interested in. Things like music, things like movies, things like the language. In 2017, he would also be at that age where, and I think this is really important, where everyone has a girlfriend and everyone's getting laid except him.
So I think what's quite interesting with that is this idea of, how would a man that's older than these victims, substantially older, how would he find a way to sort of weasel his way into their lives? Well, one way is you pretend that you're younger or whatever, but the other way is that, and we know what Anthony Shots did, I think he pretended to be a music icon or something, like a rock star. But the other way is, if you're a father and you've got a daughter, you know what your daughter's interested in. That, in a way, is a much more sinister and disturbing access route, which is, oh, I see that you're interested in this and that and that. And so you then use that in the dialogue. Also, the way that they speak, right? That, in a way, is very hard, a very difficult nut to crack, because that person is getting expert knowledge through a first-hand experience with his own daughter, who's of a similar age, right?
And it's starting to become a serious issue. It's starting to become a serious crisis. The other aspect is he's a white male and the victims are also Caucasian. He's got a low status occupation, which is contrasted by his high status bogus profile, which we'll get to in a moment.
So the same thing applies with Richard Allen. Was Richard Allen low status, right? It looks like he was unfulfilled. It looks like he was unhappy. It looks like he was frustrated, right? But was he low status? Like, did he, what was his education level like? And look at Jeffrey Dahmer, also low education, also low status. What was Richard Allen's everyday job situation? You kind of had the same thing with the Yorkshire Ripper. He was sort of a truck driver and had a very humdrum life. He had a very humdrum life, but his inner life was what's the word, extremely extreme. In a weird way, you have that with Chris Watts as well. You've got this mild-mannered silver fox, and yet he listens to heavy metal music, and a lot of other things are going on, right? So sometimes when your life is extremely humdrum, extremely ordinary, your fantasy life can be extremely extraordinary, right? I think that's true of a lot of people. And that's also why, if your life is humdrum and you're unhappy, do something about it. Try and find a way to make your life more interesting. Instead of going into fantasy and into, I don't know, online, try and find a way in the real world, in real life, to make your life more interesting. Reach out to people, travel, change your routines, do something different. Go out into the unknown, take risks, move, get out of your chair. I don't know, all those sort of things. Anyway, let's continue.
Being in a low status occupation can often mean that it's difficult to be seen as attractive, or to for someone that you're attracted to, for them to be attracted back to you, right? In a low status occupation. And we also know from his own admissions what he was preoccupied with.
So I think what's quite interesting there that I haven't really touched on, maybe I'll touch on a little bit later, is Keegan Kline, I think you'll agree, is not the he's not the most attractive guy. And so you can imagine he wants to have certain relationships, but he can't. Like, he literally can't have the relationship repertoire of the average guy. He's having a less than average relationship repertoire. And so he's frustrated. So he's trying to cheat that process, right? And he seemed to cheat that process by turning to pornography, right? Now, you can apply the same thing to Richard Allen. Although Richard Allen's married, you might imagine, is he happily married? Well, he doesn't seem terribly happy in some of those videos. But even prior to him being married, like with Chris Watts, did he have many relationships? Did he have any fulfilling relationships? Would he have preferred a more exciting romantic life? Let's just put it that way. And also, because of his appearance, is he capable of having relationships with the sort of people he wants to have relationships with? And I think that's very par for the course today. There are so many beautiful people on social media, but far more people aren't perfect. Far more people aren't beautiful, I would say. I mean, youth tends to be quite beautiful. And so what do those people do, the not beautiful people, what do they do about all the beautiful people they see around them? What do older people do about all the younger people they see around them? Do they accept, well, I'm getting older and that's life? Or do they not accept that? Let's continue.
And we'll get to that in a moment as well. But basically, it was young girls, inappropriately young. And so there is a history and a backstory and an identity that fits so far. In other words, the profile, and that's the most important starting point, that fits so far. Is there anything else? And so if we look at...
So I just want to touch on that comment. There's no reason why just evil people. I must say I fundamentally disagree with that. That is coming from this idea that things in life are random and fragmented and disconnected, and that's a big lie. Things that happen in crimes take place because things are connected. Your childhood is connected to your adulthood. Thanks a lot, Matt Clement. Thanks very much for that. let's put the ball in your in your court, though. Do you guys agree that there's no reason why this happened? It's just evil people. Do you guys think that that's true? It just happened. A guy was walking and he saw two girls and evil impulse took over. Is that what you think happened? Kelly says this was planned. That's definitely an interesting thought. Nature and nurture contribute, I think. Wolfie says it's not true. Life can make people evil. I was saying to you earlier that if you have certain dark impulses and you entertain them, that's the first step. A thought comes into your mind, and sometimes that's just normal. You see something and an idea comes to you. Do you entertain that thought? Do you actually flesh it out? Do you actually stop and spend time with that thought? That's the first step. That's the very first step. The next step is you start fantasizing about that thought. You start really feeding that idea, right? And so there's nothing random about it. It's literally a process with an inevitable conclusion as that process becomes more and more extreme. It has to be nipped in the bud, and yes, that's also true. If you think about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I think is quite an interesting analogy here. He committed a crime really early on, and then for a long time, many years, he stopped. And he said, I tried to push it away. And then he said something like he just couldn't resist it. It sounds like evil just came over him like a dark cloud. No. You had these fantasies. You could have said, I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to make an effort to have proper relationships with people. He didn't do that. I'm going to make an effort to not be so isolated. He didn't do that. I'm going to make an effort to deal with my intimacy problems. He didn't do that. Let's have a look at some of your comments. A lot of it's got to do with discipline. Do you have the ability to say, I'm going to discipline these thoughts and ideas? I'm going to exercise some self-control. There's going to be a break in the thing of stimulus and response. I'm stimulated by this. Well, I'm going to respond in a different way. I'm going to say, should you be doing this? Terry says, do you think he moved near the school on purpose? It's an interesting question. I would say no. I would say no in terms of the crime, but in terms of having a kid going to school, having a young kid that needs to go to school, many people move near to schools with children. So I don't think that played into the psychology, but I think just the average psychology was that, right? So where I grew up, we lived literally across the road from a school, and my sister just walked to school. But so there was a lot of her school friends that came over, and I'm not sure if it's revealing too many private details, but there was a point where I had a relationship with one of the teachers at that school. Not a student at that school, a teacher at that school. I did have a relationship with someone at that school, but I mean, she was, I don't know, a couple of years younger than me, but definitely older than my sister. But the point is, when you're in that situation where you see people every day, it is going to have an impact on you. It had an impact on me. I mean, I lived close to a girls' school. I must say it was actually quite strange. I had relatively few relationships with people at that school compared to in other schools, but it is going to have an impact. And the question is, I mean, I was a triathlete, and girls liked me, I guess. But what if you, what's the word? What if you have a sexual appetite or a sexual feelings, and the girls you like don't like you? What do you do with that? Well, doesn't that start leading to seek a secret identity and secret thoughts, and maybe increasingly inappropriate thoughts, right? Okay, shall we continue? Yeah, that's basically, I think, addressing what Terry asked. Okay, so let's continue.
Who he is, part of that is what he does for a living. And so we find out that he's a musician from Indiana. Besides that, he's worked as a casino table dealer in Nevada. And he was behind the catfish social media account Anthony Shots, which is probably the most important aspect in terms of what he was doing. And all of this is provided to us by a search warrant filed in Indiana. Klein is the guy behind the account. His full name is Keegan Anthony Klein, and he.
So I don't know if you noticed somewhere where he gave his address, it said something about something marijuana drive. It does make you wonder, to what extent do substances play a role in the story? Was Richard Allen an alcoholic? Did Richard Allen take certain substances? We know that Jeffrey Dahmer drank a lot of alcohol, and the alcohol probably fed into that idea of fantasy, right? I actually had a couple of gin and tonics last night, and I think it had some kind of weird mixture with antibiotics, and I had really visceral dreams about my friend Alex that died, like just very disturbing dreams. And it does make you wonder, in terms of his psychology, did he drink? Did he drink more than usual or less than usual? He does seem to be a fairly big guy, so it does make you wonder, was he addicted to food? Did he drink a lot? Was there any aspect in that respect that was different? It would just be interesting to know.
He has also got ties to marijuana and music businesses, right? So look at those things: music, gambling, marijuana, and what is missing from that mixture? How does the cliche go about drugs and rock and roll? What's the first one? Something, drugs, and rock and roll. So it seems as though this character had the drugs sorted out and the rock and roll sorted out. Well, what about the other thing?
So what I think is quite interesting about this now, obviously, if you've just come on, what we're doing is we're looking at what I was thinking about, and what I think all of us were thinking about 10 months ago when we thought Keegan Klein is the one, right? Can you see how sometimes you reverse engineer? I think that happens so often in true crime. You reverse engineer the details to make them fit. So what I was saying was hypothetically true, but it wasn't true, right? So it all makes sense, except it's not true. And you've got to be very careful doing that, where you reverse engineering things at the same time that you reverse engineering, and you can do that. I think you should also say, okay, but what doesn't fit here? So you can say, let's be honest, these things, when you reverse engineer them, do add up, right? But let's also be honest and say, what doesn't add up here? What doesn't really work here, right? And I think, to be, I guess, a little bit silly about addressing that is, do you think a very large guy like Keegan Klein would be able to sort of run after teenagers? And in other words, would he be athletic enough to sort of subdue them? And I think you can ask the same question of Richard Allen. Would someone who's 45 years old be able to do that? But I think between the two of them, I think I would put my money on Richard Allen. But you get what I'm saying? It's easy to be Monday morning quarterback when you've got the answer, right? It's easy to be very clever and yes, this is so obvious when you've got the answer, but sometimes you've got the wrong answer. And you allow what you think you know to become what you know, except it's actually not even true. In other words, there's a cognitive bias that's at work where you're saying, this is the guy, I'm very sure this is the guy, so this is the guy. No, that's not how it works. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, he was a couch potato. Okay, so let's continue.
And he's 23 years old. Well, wasn't that sorely missing in Klein's case? And was it a case of desperate times call for desperate measures? And weren't these desperate measures going online and going to a lot of effort to create kind of a profile and then actually succeeding at his sort of deviant schemes, right? Now, finally, as we're about to see.
So what do you guys think? Let's do a quick poll. What do you guys think? Do you think that Richard Allen... So I'm going to give you guys three options. A is that Richard Allen was online and was quite actively online, and the online aspect is part of this case. That's A. B, he was never online. What is C? Or that he actually does have a social media presence, but it's just sort of somewhat inactive. Which one do you think it is? That he was online, that's part of this case, and then he deleted it. B, that he was never online to begin with, or C, that there's some social media, not a lot, and it just doesn't take you anywhere. Which one do you think it is? It's A, B, or C. So A, he was online, actively online, and then deleted his social media and hasn't been on since. And you can kind of imagine, I don't want to put my picture on social media. I don't even want my wife to put my picture on social media. SW Firefly says B. I think that it's totally irrelevant. Okay, it's quite interesting. That's also quite interesting. So you can imagine, and this is, I think, quite fascinating. When imagine you've committed a crime and someone has put out a sketch. Do you see yourself in that sketch? And then you say, wow, I'm going to take off my social media. In other words, do you see yourself in that sketch and worry someone else could see you? Or do you look at that sketch and say, that looks nothing like me, ha, 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 they'll never find me? Or are you worried? And is that worry something that sort of boils down to, you're so concerned that you just remove all your social media? Right? Think about that image. Do you feel like, well, that sketch could get me into trouble, and so it's a risk I can't afford to take, and so you get rid of all your social media? It would also be interesting to know if he did do that, if he did get rid of his social media, when did he? That would be interesting. Okay, let's continue.
Klein's appearance, also, when I say appearance, I mean his appearance on the scene, his appearance on the timeline. It fits into the timeline. The incident took place on February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day 2017. his social media appearances and comments fit into that timeline too. And there's this little
So I think another interesting thing when you say, how do you possibly connect Richard Allen? I think it would be interesting to know, could they pull his cell phone records? Is that how they actually made the connection? Not through social media, but through cell phone records. I mean, you could imagine that theoretically you could go through all the cell phone records of February 13, 2017, all of the cell phone records that ping off a particular tower. And there might be thousands. But if you systematically go through them, you could say, well, take all women off this list. Take all people that are under the age of, well, I suppose they wouldn't be using cell phones. But anyway, you go through that list. And then theoretically, the other thing, because what you want to do is, does Richard Allen have a alibi? Where was he on that day? What does his family say where he was? Shouldn't he have been at work on that day? Was he at work on that day? So, if he does have a job, you go to his employer and you say, okay, well, was he at work that day? If he wasn't, well, that's quite interesting. Okay, let's continue. So really what we're doing is we're going through this video from 10 months ago, and we're just looking at how it applies to Richard Allen, and also how we were wrong to assume that it was definitely Keegan Klein, right?
little screen grab from Keegan Klein's, I think it's his Twitter account, and you can see some cryptic remarks taking place the day after the incident, what is going on in our world, and so on. So it's quite interesting. A lot of those Facebook posts that he's provided there have since been deleted, which is also interesting. So
there you have a potential intertextuality, which is Keegan Klein deleted his social media, right? So why wouldn't someone who was responsible do exactly the same thing? And the answer is, if they did have social media, you can bet that they did delete it. I mean, it's part of the staple of true crime now anyway. People take down their social media. People delete their social media. You've had it in the Caitlin Armstrong case. Caitlin Armstrong took down her social media. Colin Strickland set his Instagram to private. It's part of the well-worn territory, the well-worn path in true crime today. Okay.
the second aspect of these 8 aspects that make it seem possible, perhaps even likely, that this case has been solved, that they have their man. Well, number 2 is he's from the area. I don't think much needs to be said here except.
So I think you know what I'm going to say there, right? Is that was something that would be true all along. And so if you were saying, you know what, I don't think it could be Richard Allen. Well, he fits the profile. Actually, I think you could actually say maybe he doesn't. I'm talking about the profile that I think everyone had was an SA dude, someone who's got a record of SA. But SA can also be, or the fantasy element can be a secret. Nobody knows that someone is capable of that until it happens, which you had with the Chris Watts case. You had the same thing with the Scott Peterson case, where no one knew that Scott Peterson was capable of being Scott Peterson, even Scott Peterson, until he did it. And what was going on there? Well, fantasies with a mistress, right? Fantasies of a mistress, and I wish I could just get rid of my wife. I wish I wasn't in a situation where my wife was pregnant, right? But that's in terms of profile. In terms of he's from the area, that fits the profile perfectly. Do you guys see that?
By looking at these maps the crime took place just outside Delphi. Yeah, you guys pronounce it Delphi. I would pronounce it Delphi. But yeah, that is a difference in pronunciation. But I'm going to defer to obviously your version of events. I'm not quite sure the Australians and folks from England would pronounce it. The point is, Klein was from Peru, which is a.
So Deborah makes quite a good point to say, if they took down their accounts or deleted materials, is it fully deleted? Now, one area where it may not be deleted is chat history, right? You may have chatted on Instagram or something, and you may have deleted your account or whatever, but a lot of that chatter may still be there. So that's definitely an aspect. Things that you can't delete are, for example, if you send texts, then that would probably be sort of carved in stone in terms of the logs from that time.
Little town that is not far from Delphi, and the park where the incident happened was on the Peru side of Delphi. It would have taken Klein about half an hour to drive from his home to the crime scene, which is very manageable. So the distance is around a.
So if you look at that, that's kind of an early sign that Keegan Klein's not really the best candidate, because look how far he actually lives from there. Whereas Richard Allen lived much, much closer. That's quite far. It's almost 40 miles, whereas Richard Allen lived 20 times closer, right? So if you put those suspects side by side and you said, okay, just based on location, who are you going to go with? Well, one of them actually lives right by the victims. The other one wouldn't have been able to encounter them directly. So then you could make the argument, what is more important here? Online encounters or real life encounters? So let's quickly run a poll on that. If you were law enforcement investigating this case, would you say what's more important to find the Delphi killer is real life encounters where they're actually brushing shoulders directly or seeing one another in person, or kind of having online encounters where you don't live right around the corner from them? Which one's more inculpatory? So let's do a quick poll. Are real life encounters going to be where you need to look for your suspect, or B, where you look online for encounters, or C, both? Let's see what you guys say. Let's go through that again. A, B, or C, which do you think Ali needed to focus on here? Someone having real life encounters, seeing them in the real fabric, seeing them through the course of every day. B, online only, or C, both? Let's see what you guys say. Quite a few A's, quite a few C's. Terry says you added the C late. Okay, so that's quite interesting. But the thing is, remember how easy it is to say that now in hindsight. If you didn't know the answer, right? If you didn't know the answer, it would be quite a difficult question. Online or real life? That would be almost impossible question to answer, right? Now we know that A is definitely relevant, and the issue of B is, could it be relevant? And I agree that I think it is C, but you had no way of knowing that. But what I think is maybe important with this case is to say, intertextually with other cases, you might want to look at real world contact. Was this person a father? Did he have a daughter of a similar age? Did they go to the same school? Is that how he may have seen someone repeatedly, right? Because remember, the way that this doesn't really work in terms of online is they were quite young, and 2017 kids in 2017 being online, I don't think it's quite the same as it is today. Not that you could ever exclude the whole online thing. I think it does happen. And I think going forward, it's going to be an interesting question. Do more of these crimes take place because someone sees something, or because in terms of the real world, or because of the online space, right? Think about Eliza Fletcher. Did the murderer of Eliza Fletcher see her online? Or did he see her repeatedly in real life? It's quite an interesting question. It's quite an important question in terms of true crime. Do you guys agree?
About 33 miles in a straight line, 47 in terms of driving distance, and it wouldn't take much longer than about 39 minutes to drive from Peru straight to Delphi. And this park where the little girls were found is on the Peru side of Delphi, right? Well, it's so weird saying that like that. It's just counterintuitive to me. Anyway, number 3, social outcast.
So do you think you can be married and be a social outcast? Do you think you can be married and be a social misfit? Do you think you can be married and lonely? Do you think you can be married and unfulfilled? Do you think you can be married and a murderer? And if you think about Chris Watts, he was all of those things. Chris Watts, although he was married, he felt, I think, quite alone in his marriage. I think he felt quite unfulfilled in his marriage, but I also think he was like an oddball, right? And so the question is, was Richard Allen a kind of a misfit? He seems to be a very socially not fluid person. I mean, he just doesn't smile at all in photos. But one wonders, was he a social outcast before at school? Does he actually have lots of friends? Just in general, does he have lots of friends? Because that's the other part. I think when you think about this idea of fantasy and having like an online life, right? But I'm talking about not just a bit of fantasy, a huge amount of fantasy. You can only do that if you're alone a lot. I mean, you can't indulge in fantasies and feed that fantasy if those fantasies keep being interrupted by going to a barbecue or going on a holiday or playing with your kids or going to a bar with your friends or watching the football. So in other words, if you've got a rich social life, that in its own ways is enhancing, is affirmative. It's in that empty space of loneliness and not even that, being an outcast, that the devil does its work, right? Does that make sense?
Would you want to go out with this guy? Most young women and young girls likely wouldn't either, and hence the problem.
So the same applies with Richard Allen. Would you want to go out with Richard Allen? See if I can bring up that video again.
That's good. That's good.
Would you want to go out with that guy? And I think the bigger issue isn't whether you would want to go out with him, it's whether he thinks you would want to go out with him. Same with, which is what Jeffrey Dahmer thought. I don't really want to go out with anyone. I don't have the tools, the social tools
That's
to
the
do
problem
that.
he was facing. And Klein likely knew this better than anyone. He'd experienced it firsthand. He realized if he just continued trying, making approaches, making advances, he wasn't going to get anywhere. And so I think he knew it, accepted it, but also wasn't resigned to being celibate for the rest of his life. He was going to do something about it. And so he came up with a strategy.
So think about that, and I guess it's different in a situation where you're married because then you don't need to be celibate. But if you think about Jeffrey Dahmer and also possibly Keegan Kline, if you think about you're a young man and you realize you just can't have particular experiences. So do you kind of say, okay, that's fine. I'll be celibate for the rest of my life. I will not do bad things. I'll just be celibate. That's quite a difficult, even if you decide to do that, it's quite a difficult choice to make, to be celibate and to remain celibate. And if they can't find a healthy way out of that dysfunction, and bear in mind, human beings, there's an animal nature to human beings that I see it with my own dog. My dog was born with a sexual appetite. And in a way, you wish it wasn't there. You wish he would just be his doggy self. But that's part of who he is, right? For better or worse, it's part of who he is. It's also part of who we are. If it's not given a natural release, it can manifest in an unnatural and unhealthy way, right? And isn't that what happened? Isn't that what happened? I think with the suspect in this case, you may have a situation of someone wants their cake and wants to eat it, like with Chris Watts. You married, but you actually want something that you think is better and nicer. I kind of get the impression that could be the case with Richard Allen. You married, but maybe you want something more than that, right? Okay.
Make it with the stuff of little girls' dreams. And so Klein conjured pretty simple fakeries of money, fast cars, and model good looks. And besides all that, he sort of identified and promoted himself as sort of a rock star, sort of a musician, a good-looking musician, and girls fell for that. So he put up pictures of wads of cash, of vehicles, of a male model, and thought that this was what young girls wanted, and it sort of.
So once again, off track there, but I think the psychology is quite sound, which is this idea of envy and coveting, right? So what Keegan Kline did, I think, quite cleverly was he used this idea of greed and the envy and coveting of young girls, where they say, well, I want a boy who's a rock star, who's rich, who drives a nice car. Use that reverse thing and say, well, I've got that. I am rich. I've got a nice car, and look how good looking I am, right? But it's using that thing of envy in the reverse direction. I think if something like that happened with Richard Allen, I think it's the opposite. He was looking at young girls and feeling feelings of envy, right? You know what I mean? He was looking at these young kids running around and perhaps pining for his own childhood, but also seeing, I don't know, the innocence of youth and being envious in a way that goes darker than that. It's envy, but it's also darker than that, right? Okay, let's continue.
Was, I guess. And so detectives with the Carroll County Sheriff's Office and the Indiana State Police discovered this Instagram profile called Anthony Shots, where Keegan Klein was sort of promoting this persona, this identity. He was using this profile between 2016 and 2017, and that's also very important. It's around the time that this incident took place. Remember, it took place in early 2017, February 2017, and he was using it on Snapchat and Instagram, and that's really important. It's important that that was sort of where it was, because it appears to be the best, the most obvious way that he would have recruited them and then also migrated them. It's also important to stress that it was not limited to these social media applications. So this fictitious profile used images of a known male model and portrayed himself as being extremely wealthy, not just a little bit wealthy, but extremely wealthy, and owning numerous sports cars, and sort of doing business between New York and LA, and sort of being a kind of a jet setter. And the creator of this profile used this information while he was communicating with juvenile females, young girls, to solicit photos of them, often, in a various states of undress, to get their addresses, and then also to meet them. And so this whole thing of meeting them puts this particular individual in the closer to the center of the target of law enforcement.
Okay, so here's a question. Can a person who was once extremely popular, I'm not quite sure what that's driving at, but I think it's this idea that once upon a time you were popular and then later on you're not, can that lead to criminality? I think it's all about this idea of a fairy tale. It's all about this idea of, so you can feel like you're in a nightmare, like a marriage can feel like a nightmare, or your situation can feel like a nightmare. And it can feel like a nightmare because, for two reasons. One is because you came from a particular fairy tale, or you had a fairy tale idea in your mind, but then reality turned out not to be that, so now it's a nightmare. In other words, the knowledge of a fairy tale, or the the awareness of a fairy tale, the holding on to a fairy tale, can actually make your life feel like a nightmare. In a weird way, it's comparing your life to a fairy tale, which could be in the past, can make your present feel like a nightmare. If you don't let go of that fairy tale, then the nightmare gets worse. On the other hand, if you're in a nightmare, or you're in something that's not particularly pleasant, you may feel like you need a fairy tale. So in other words, if you're in a marriage that's not great, or your situation's not terribly good, you may feel like, I'm in a nightmare and I need a fairy tale to deal with it, right? That's where the fantasy element comes along. So I personally don't feel, and I don't know him very well, but I personally don't feel like Richard Allen came from a fairy tale. I just don't get that idea. I don't feel like he had like this great high school life, but I do feel like he found himself in a humdrum life that he didn't like. And I'm not saying it's a nightmare, but it was just so dull that he wanted some excitement. He wanted some action. He wanted something, some release from that crushing boredom, right? And that then leads to fantasy and fairy tales. I don't think his past was where he was a wonderfully balanced person. He had a great life. I don't get that sense, but it's hard to say without more information. Do you guys have that sense that he was once upon a time a Prince Charming? it's hard to say. Okay, let's continue. I'm glad I addressed your question, Snowflake Forest, in a way that you liked to be addressed.
Enforcement. So if law enforcement are looking for a particular person, this person is coming pretty close to the center of exactly what they would be hoping to find. The police have already identified the model in his images, and they're not looking for him. They're looking for the person who created the Anthony Shots profile. And of course, we know who that is. Keegan Klein. So there.
Okay, so here's a great question. Why young girls and not an adult? I think it's to do with agency. I think if you feel like you are, how can I put it? If you feel like the person you're attracted to would be attracted to you, then you have the requisite amount of agency. You've got the requisite amount of power. You can exert power on your world, on your fellow man or woman, right? You often see in marriages people kind of seem in a similar status. They might be both incredibly good looking, or he's very rich and she's very beautiful, or whatever. He's very charismatic, she's got an amazing personality. It could be whatever it is. But where someone is extremely weak, right, then they may feel like in order to feel powerful, but remember, some of it is also you want to feel the opposite of being emasculated. In other words, you want to feel sexually powerful. You want to feel sexually, that there's a sexual dynamic comes back to life, right? So there may be a sense that when you are with someone who's older, that sexual energy is also very weak, right? And so there may be a sense for him that the younger he goes in terms of his mind, the younger he goes, the more his physical strength becomes, it outmatches the person that he's with. So in other words, if he's with someone who's an adult or someone kind of his age, there's kind of a similar physical competition going on, if I can put it that way. But as soon as you go a lot younger, his power increases, but it's not only physical, it's also other things, his resources, his, it's almost like a fisherman and the little fish in the pond, and the fisherman has got a strategy, and so he has ultimate control of that situation. It's kind of like that. He's got the edge in that sense, and it feels a little bit like Jeffrey Dahmer, in that Jeffrey Dahmer felt like he had to incapacitate his victims, otherwise he couldn't get a particular outcome in that situation, right? Now, it could be the same thing here, where he felt like he only felt that sexual power if it was in a situation with someone weak and more vulnerable. Otherwise, he would feel weak and vulnerable. In other words, he wants to feel stronger and a rise in his sexual power, right? Where he's not at all intimidated by that, right? Does that make sense? That's how I answer that. Let's have a look at some of your points. I think it is about control, but it's also about a perception of a lack of one's own agency. I also think there may be a taboo element in it, which is, I'm married, what's the worst possible thing I could do? Well, the taboo element makes it kind of titillating. And I think that plays into fantasy. A lot of extreme fantasy is more exciting because it's forbidden. I think that's another aspect as well. Because, the forbidden fruit somehow makes the fruit more exciting and interesting and hard to resist, more tempting, right? I think that's also part of that aspect. Let's see what you guys say. Yeah, that is also what I thought, like two fish in a barrel, that he has absolute control over them, and that's what he liked, that's what he wanted. Okay, so let's continue.
Here you have an admission that the cops are interested in the man behind the profile, and as I say, we know who that is, Keegan Klein. That brings us to the fourth point, no ordinary deviant. So you might think Klein is just some sicko preying on kids. He's a dime a dozen, not quite.
So I think that also applies potentially to this potential perpetrator. You might say there are lots of people who have fantasies. All of us have sexual desires. So what makes this or that person any different? That's the issue. What does make this or that person different? Specifically, how is their fantasy world, how is their fairy tale world, how is their nightmare different to yours or mine? And probably there is a difference. Probably it's not what you think about their fairy tale or their nightmare, it's what they think about it. It's also the deviance is probably a lot more dysfunctional and dirty. I don't know how else to put it. The deviance is a lot more extreme than average. I think all of us are capable of a certain amount of deviance, to be honest. Like, I think if anyone had to look at browser histories, you would kind of go, okay, well, that's what you're interested in, kind of thing, right? But there's a certain aspect to that is kind of normal. But there's a point where fantasy is sort of normal, deviant but normal. But then there's a point where it goes beyond that, where it becomes potentially got violent aspects to it, potentially got like aggressive aspects to it, and worse, right? I think it's fair to say that a lot of people have what's the word? Not antisocial interests in terms of sexual fantasy. It becomes very dangerous when your sexual fantasies are violent or going into that whole arena of things that are literally illegal. That's not good. I mean, that is the epitome of it being antisocial. So where we're thinking about what's his name, Keegan Klein having kind of a no ordinary deviance, I think one's got to ask the same question about Richard Allen, right? I also think, this is just my opinion, in the Madeleine McCann case, the fact that people really think that somebody would target a 3-year-old says to me more about you than what happened in that case. Like, yeah, I'm not going to say much more than that. Okay, let's continue.
He went to extraordinary efforts to design and curate an elaborate online persona, not just on one social media platform, but on SoundCloud as well and Wikipedia. There are even songs on SoundCloud that, lead one in a particular direction in terms of one's thinking. And one can imagine that he would tell someone he's a musician, they would ask to hear one of his songs, he would send the.
Okay, so I think Snooker Man may be new to watching this. You might be thinking that this is suggesting that Klein and Allen were accomplices. We're not suggesting that. I don't know whether that's the case. I do think it's possible that when law enforcement went on a different tack and they sort of looked at social media, they may have stumbled upon, and this is total speculation, they may have stumbled on another profile, and maybe that's how they made a connection. I don't know. I'm not at all saying that they were accomplices. It's possible. What we're doing here is we're looking at what we thought 10 months ago and just seeing where we were wrong, but also how that psychology, how that applies potentially to this case. I hope that makes sense.
The song from the SoundCloud account, and then that would start the conversation. There would be the sense of, wow, I can't believe you're a musician. I love that song, blah, blah, blah. So when he got a bite on Instagram, as I say, he migrated his catch to Snapchat, where the sleaziness could escalate to a different level behind a curtain of.
So I don't think so. I have a feeling that it's like someone who doesn't have a criminal record, right? And that's partially why it was so difficult to find this particular perpetrator. That's my assumption. I do think so. So you may take that away. You may say there's no prior history, but I do think there is some kind of history, perhaps in terms of online activity. I think there's some psychology that is relevant to this. I personally don't think that he committed other crimes, because I think if he had, they would have found him a lot sooner. That's my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you think that he committed other crimes? Bear in mind he's married, and a lot of criminals commit crimes because they can't get a job, they're not married, they're single, and they are outcasts, right? And they are quite dysfunctional in their lives. It actually looks like, in terms of his outward life, he seems quite functional. He's a father, he's a husband, he has a job, but obviously something seemed to be missing in that he missed, but other people didn't really notice. Kay says, I also think he has committed other crimes and gotten away with it. Okay. Well, I guess we will find out. We will find out. Okay. Well, interesting question on that line.
Digital privacy. Some of the lyrics from the song Hear Me are, yeah, baby, feel me out. Yeah, baby, hear me out. So quite suggestive. And I think it's intentionally done that way. The Anthony Shots profile, at the time that the law enforcement sort of paid attention to it, they saw that he had.
So that's a really good point. And I think you must again apply it to Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer also committed his first murder. There was a time when Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first murder. He didn't commit murders before his first murder, right, by definition. So how did that criminal psychology come into place? Well, all the things he did with animals, right? All the fantasy that preceded it. And I would submit the same scenario potentially in this case, where you don't need to actually do all these things in order to have a repertoire. What you likely do need is for that fantasy to be wired into place over quite a long period of time. The fantasy happens over and over again, is quite violent, quite extreme, so that by the time the action actually takes place, it's not a surprise to the person who's committing it. Does that make sense? In other words, it's been thought of many, many times. It's been fantasized about many, many times. And so although in reality it's the first time, I think the fantasy aspect makes it feel like it's happened many, many times. That's how I see it.
Had 77 followers, so he wasn't doing terribly well. But it's also possible that some of those followers have since abandoned that profile. He was following 343 individuals. It would be interesting to see who they were. And he'd only put up 11 posts, which is not a terrible amount of activity.
Okay, so again, to address that, wouldn't his wife know about that? Like, wouldn't his wife know that he's done lots of things? And if she did, why wouldn't she leave him? Also, his child, wouldn't they know? But I guess we will find out. Wisdom Seeker says, I wonder what his daughter is thinking. I wonder if she's looking back, putting things together. Yeah.
But it's also possible that he removed some. Then what I find very interesting is the way he self-identifies on his Wikipedia page, the way that he sets up himself, this fairy tale version of himself. And so he says, in terms of the Wikipedia page, Keegan Anthony Klein.
Okay, so someone says, you're comparing him to Dharma. Do you think this nutter committed more such crimes because Dharma was very active? No, I don't think he did. Major difference, Dharma wasn't married. Dharma never got married. Dharma seemed to never have a boyfriend. Dharma didn't have a kid. This guy had a marriage and a kid, and that makes it totally different. Dharma was a lot more isolated and effed up. So you can't quite measure it in that sense.
Born May 27, 1994, and by the way, that is accurate. That is his birth year, certainly. Is the lead vocalist and guitar player of pop punk band Keegan Klein and a former live fill-in lead singer.
So thanks for that, Nisi. In terms of this idea, did he have trauma as a child? It's an interesting question. The fact that he got married, someone saw something in him. Someone saw enough in him to marry him and also have a child with him. And you kind of get the idea that his daughter seems to be quite happy. She doesn't look like she smiles in photos. It doesn't look like she's had a miserable childhood. I think trauma is a very interesting word, and I kind of want to say subjective word. What I mean is what he may think of as traumatic, in other words, lonely or unsatisfying. You may say, and maybe his wife thought this, and maybe his daughter thought this, he wasn't terribly happy with this or terribly happy with that. But he might feel that was actually quite horrible. I mean, I can tell you, I had a horrible high school, but a friend of mine, when I told him about it, he said, wow, that's weird. You seemed like it was all water off a duck's back. I didn't really realize it bothered you. I'm like, are you for real? Did you really think that it really didn't? And he was like, yeah, it seemed like you were quite a tough guy and you didn't just like water off a duck's back. So someone else may have an idea of your trauma that is totally different to yours, right? Does that make sense? So I don't think it's some kind of very heavy event that happened to him, although it's possible, because I think if it was a very heavy event that led to him being a really bad apple, he wouldn't have gotten married. He would have had his wife would have left him, right? But I do think there was probably something there. It could maybe had parents that were not very loving, that didn't imbue him a sense of confidence, that were quite critical of him. You know, but that's a great question. Thanks for that.
Of the band Play Royale. He is an inspiring musician living in Las Vegas. Obviously not true. And Indiana. Okay, that part is true. Currently writing his album Vegas, which is scheduled to drop worldwide, streaming March 13th, 2020, under Gold Bar USA. Now, so it's quite.
That's a good point, Mel. But the thing is, it's how you handle your trauma, right? I've had a significant amount of trauma, and I think writing 100 books has helped me to deal with my trauma, right? It's how you handle your trauma, and obviously, if you handle your trauma, even if it's a little bit of trauma, if you handle it by having certain kinds of fantasies, right? Even if you haven't had any trauma, if you handle real life, you might say real life is my trauma. Just ordinary real life is traumatic. Just ordinary life is just too much for me to handle, so I'm going to have fantasies. Then that can be the route to the dark side. Just fantasy. You don't need trauma for there to be crimes. It's what you fixate on. But trauma definitely can help that process along, right? You may also feel I've been hard done by society. I didn't have, what happened to me wasn't fair, and so I've got a bone to pick with society. I deserve to get payback for what happened to me. But just in terms of that life sucks, or that life's a drag, right? Okay, let's continue.
Quite glamorous. He's Vegas based, but he's sort of setting it out in Indiana, writing his album, and it's going to drop worldwide, and it's going to be quite amazing and everything. And this is meant to get excitement, and I do think that he wanted the release date quite far in the future, because when that date comes up and nothing is released, well, then what? What happens? It goes on. He's managed by Artery Foundation.
So that's a good question. We have addressed it a little bit earlier. How did they connect the guy? Was it a tip? It could have been as simple as after almost 6 years, 5 years later, someone phoned in a tip. It could have been something like that. It could even have come from his own family. Could it be evidence connected to the guy? My suspicion is that they followed the fake accounts, and that they followed that aspect, the social media, and possibly through that found their way to either Richard Allen himself or someone who knew Richard Allen, right? And then this part I don't know, but as far as I'm aware, someone dug up his backyard, and this is total speculation because I don't even know if that's true. If they did dig up his backyard, I think they may have found clothing, for example, and they may have found DNA of that clothing that links him to Libby or Abby or both of them. That's my assumption. That's one possibility.
Foundation. He got an offer while playing poker in Las Vegas for a job with the Red Bull sign band Beartooth. He went on tour with them for 2 months and decided to join them for the Vans Warped Tour 2015.
So can I ask you guys a favor while we're listening to this? Can you guys, because I had a very short window of opportunity to research what I wanted to research. Can you guys find me some news stories dealing with them digging up his yard? Because I haven't been able to find that myself. If you can find that, please put a link in the chat. Just news stories of them digging up Richard Allen's yard. Because I've heard about that, I just haven't found any confirmation of that.
And also worked on the Vans Warped Tour 2017 and 2018. He then got a gig with Amorosa for a fall tour, and so it goes on, so it goes on. And then some of the bands that he apparently played with include Boys Like Girls and The Cute Is What We Aim For. That's apparently the names of some of the bands. And then he goes on to say his break was a blackjack dealer, professional poker player, and he co-owned a marijuana delivery service in Las Vegas. He currently has a marketing company called Klein and Co. So I think some of this is true, with quite a lot of fiction and embellishment added to all of that. And so the Indiana State Police in the Lafayette district have posted these images of this male model from Anthony Schott's account. Now you might think, where does the Anthony come from? Well, his name is Keegan Anthony Klein, and so he uses the middle name as Anthony Schott's, which identifies him both as the originator, but also gives him a certain degree of anonymity, right? And I think part of why he did this is because social media often requires you to use your original name. I don't so much mean on Instagram, but certainly on others, such as Wikipedia and Facebook, where there can sometimes be a problem if your name doesn't correspond to your email or something like that. And so creating a fake account, he needs to have a certain degree of protection from his own name, but also a link to his own name, if that makes sense. So I think the thing that is interesting is the Indiana State Police showing this profile of this male model, which is, contrived by, conjured by this fellow, Keegan Klein. And then they specifically say, while investigating the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, they have uncovered an online profile named Anthony Schatz. This profile was used from 2016 to 2017 on social media. And then you might say, oh, well, how is this relevant to Abigail Williams? And that, well, it's being mentioned by the Indiana State Police. It's something that they seem to see as very significant. And that brings us to the fifth point. After 2017, he couldn't stop. And this is a fact. This is dealing with Keegan Klein. So whatever happened on 2017, we know that Klein's predatory activity went on beyond 2017. And I think this suggests that things were getting more and more out of hand. The fantasies were getting the better of him. He was getting more and more out of control. But the perp couldn't stop, couldn't hold back. And what he created had become an addiction. He was becoming caught up in it. And because recidivism is so typical of these particular criminals, and this is also why there's a sex register, Klein possibly got more and more caught up in his deviant fairy tale. And you can see that by some of these posts, such as in May 2018, happy birthday to himself, and he puts up some sort of glamorous photos of bottles of alcohol and a sort of a setting, I guess, in Las Vegas, where he is sort of, I think, soliciting attention to say, I'm having a birthday by myself, who wants to join me, kind of thing. And it's possible that he was in this location because he did work.
Okay, so I did find this story, but it's not dealing with excavation that I was looking for. It's just a memorial park. But this is quite old. This is from 4 years ago. But I was looking for, digging in the ground and maybe in a field, and came up with this particular story. It's quite old though. One does wonder whether the situation in the Kristen Smart case impacted this investigation, because sometimes you see law enforcement getting a fresh shot in their arm when they see another case being solved, and you kind of get that feeling like, could it be happening in the Suzanne Morphew case? Is that what was happening in this case? It just makes you wonder. Okay. Do you guys want me to continue? Let's see who's here. What does Nisi say? Okay. So yeah, if you can find that Facebook post where they talk about the excavation, that will be really good. I haven't been able to find it. Terry says, do you think that COVID would be a catalyst if Richard was working in the pharmacy then? I think that is such a fascinating point, is that we do know that he worked in a pharmacy, and you can imagine that that was particularly not fun, but bear in mind when this happened. This happened in 2017. It predates COVID by 4 years, right? So bear that in mind. I'm not quite, maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, Terry, but it is very interesting that Richard Allen is a pharmacist, and I think Stephanie would be a good person to ask about that. What is it like working in a pharmacy? And I actually went to a pharmacy yesterday. Went to a doctor yesterday, went to a pharmacy yesterday, and I spoke to a really beautiful person behind the counter. And she was wearing like rainbow horns on her head because it's Christmas. And I said, oh, I see you guys are celebrating Christmas already. And she was like, it's a nightmare because we've got to hear these same Christmas carols all the time. And I kind of got this weird sense, this person in front of me seemed so, I don't know, like just seemed very on the ball, and like she was, someone enjoying her job, and yet she was saying that she wasn't looking forward to the next couple of months. And I got a totally different idea that that was part of her work experience, was the listening to these carols all the time. And one's got to wonder what I don't know, what is it like being a pharmacist? I think, especially now, I think Stephanie could answer that question. Nisi says, I'm at the pharmacy once a week because of my health. So stressed, but great at what they do. I think it is quite a stressful place. But I also think it's quite a sterile place. Some pharmacies are different to others, but the pharmacies I know are not places you want to hang around in for any length of time. They're quite dull, sterile places, and everyone who comes to you is sick in a way. Cynthia, I don't know enough about this case to answer that, but if there were two personas, I think it's certainly possible. I would imagine no, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there is a social media dimension to this case. I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, let's continue. Kathleen says, I love pharmacy work. I'm a pharmacy tech. But you're a woman, and a lot of women are very detail oriented. The question is, does Richard Allen look happy? Also, was Jeffrey Dahmer's father happy? He was also sort of in that same sort of thing. So again, does this guy look happy? Does he look like a happy pharmacist? he wasn't happy about something. So what do you think it was? Okay, let's continue. Let me just bring myself back and go over to there. Okay.
Work as a casino dealer, and so perhaps some of the images he had access to were real in inverted commas. So that's quite important. Then the sixth point, and I think this is almost as important as the first point, dealing with his profile. He confessed to creating a fake Anthony Shots profile. So it's not speculation, although I suppose one could say technically we can't be 100% sure that if he says that he created the profile, he did. We can't be 100% sure because people lay claim to, in the Brian Laundrie case, for example, there was all the fake social media surrounding that. It does happen all the time.
Kay, as far as I know, he was a tech. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't know whether it means he works behind the counter. I don't really know what that means. Let's see if we can get some information. Is it pharmacy tech? Let's have a look. What does a pharmacy technician do? They prepare and supply medicines for prescriptions under the supervision of a pharmacist. So here are some of the pros and cons. You will have to meet specific education requirements. Your training to become a pharmacy technician will not be free. Okay, whatever. Top pros of being a pharmacy technician. Short training, you can complete your training online. Oh, that's interesting. You can train online. Earn a steady paycheck. You will be in a career with a great job outlook. You'll work in a clean environment. Now, that definitely makes you think about, Chris Watts as well was a very clean criminal. Was this also a very clean criminal? Flexible work schedule, is that why he didn't work on the Monday? You can choose to work in different environments, job stability. You may have the option to work full-time. The certification is recognized around the country. You will get to help people. Thanks a lot for that. Thank you. I want to go back to this other question here. Is pharmacy technician a good job? Is it stressful? It can be stressful. You may be doing everything at once and in a timely manner. Customers are awful, but most are kind, but some are awful. So I in my background, I have a little bit of experience in this area. I've worked packing medicines when I lived in Cape Town, and I found it ultra boring. Obviously, I wasn't a pharmacy technician, but what I was doing was I was in the very dull area. It's like you're just unboxing medications and putting them here and putting them there. And it was some of the most boring work experience I've ever had. It was just so dull and so sterile and so mindless. You kind of feel like you're dead. Like, I don't know. It's just, I found it incredibly horrible. just because it's like writing a maths exam. I just found it very, very boring and yeah, that's it. Nature Lover says, I used to deliver for a pharmacy. At the scene with Haley says, just woken up to this. Yeah, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, I think, in the UK. So some of the rest of the world are just waking up to this news. Licensed 21 February. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. If that's true, then I'm sure he was studying in that direction prior to that. And he may have been studying online. He may also have been working, like, what's the word? Working, getting work experience. I wouldn't be surprised. Van Letchum says, I'll have to catch up with this. Just woke up. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So, yeah, I mean, these are things I don't know. I don't know when he started working there. It's very early in this case to be thinking and speculating on someone completely new, right? Wolfie says something. Okay. Oh, 7 a.m. Yeah, might be a bit of a time difference. History is HRP says registered pharmacists are well paid, in high demand, grad degree and licensing exams, very smart folks. Yeah, but the question is the work environment stimulating, interesting, or not? That's the question. Okay, I just want to see if there's anything else to look at here. What is a pharmacy technician? So I know that Stephanie has been very stressed in her work, and there's more to say about that as well. I think I'm not putting words in her mouth if I say she hasn't been very happy, and she's been working in a pharmacy. So I don't know whether it's the job that gives you the most joy. Someone on here did say that they enjoy their work, but some people don't. And I don't know whether a man would really necessarily fit, be a better fit necessarily. I do think it's very interesting, this idea of the sterility that is very important in working in a pharmacy, and the difficulty it's been to catch this particular killer. The Delphi case has been very difficult, possibly because someone was a very clean perpetrator. That is also true. Yeah, I mean, when I went to the pharmacy the day before yesterday, I basically said, do you have anything for tick bite fever? And someone over the guy's shoulder, the same girl who helped me yesterday, said, oh, you can't get anything over the counter, you're going to have to go to a doctor. So I actually took her advice and went to the doctor and then came back with the prescription. But she seems incredibly smart. And to be honest, I've actually been entertaining the idea of, I've written a script out for the trip Magellan took around the world, and I actually thought she's so articulate, so intelligent. She was kind of like wearing glasses, and I thought I wouldn't mind hiring her to read the script, just because I prefer someone who looks like her and sounds like her to be telling the story than me. And I've just been wondering whether I should ask her. She'll probably say no, but I was wondering whether I shouldn't ask this pharmacist essentially if she wants to narrate something on YouTube. Quite weird. But the whole point being that I found her really, really clever. When she gave me my antibiotics, she said to me, "Don't drink this one with dairy, right? And in other words, probably don't have it in the morning with your breakfast, because that's when you often have, milk in your whatever." And then she said, "This one, don't mix it with," what was the other one? I don't know. But she also suggested that I take another thing for that brings the bacteria back into your stomach, because I was taking 2 antibiotics, and I thought, wow, you really know your stuff, Yeah, no, that definitely wasn't wasn't good. So, what does someone say here? My pharmacist is great. The old one was mean. Well, the whole question here is the pharmacist we're talking about here, was he a good guy, or was he hating his life and hating his job? I think something that's interesting with this case is pharmacists deal with a lot of diseased human beings. They deal with a lot of the deterioration of human beings. And think about, in the Jeffrey Dahmer case, that, and what ultimately you're thinking about disease, sickness, and death all the time. Doesn't that manifest in some way, right? So what does it say here? What does a pharmacy technician do? Supply medicines, assemble medicines, provide information, manage areas of medicines such as dispensaries. Anyway, so there we go. Let's have a look at some new comments. He was a licensed tech as of the 21st of February. So basically a year, yeah, very stressful. He was basically licensed a year after this took place. I think that's part of what they're doing. I'm not sure if I think it's a lot more than that. They also deal with people. Techs don't fill narcotics. Okay. You do have to be smart. You do get the feeling that the person who committed this crime is smart. Cindy says, can we get back to Delphi? Mel Stiller says, I think we call them pharmacy assistants over here. Terry says, there's a question about the staging. Do you have thoughts on that? No, because the information about the crime scene is very limited. Also, I've got to admit, I don't know as much about this case as you probably may know more than me. So just that staging is very common now. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. Let me just do this.
So is that the case here? And that is where I think the authorities are trying to be careful and are being somewhat hesitant. You might think this is all theory, all hypothetical, but there are some promising leads provided by Klein himself. And the Indiana cops have said that they believe the killer is someone they have already interviewed. It's the clip I played at the beginning of this. And so this I find incredibly strong evidence. And this is from the police report. They say, after Keegan's interview, he was polygraphed at the Peru State Police Post by Sergeant Matthew Collins. Wouldn't it be good to see that polygraph and see what the questions were and the answers? Keegan and Sergeant Collins spoke about this incident and case. Keegan again admitted to creating the fake Anthony Shots profiles and speaking to underage girls. Keegan told Sergeant Collins that the girls ranged from 15 to 17 years old. That is a match for the kind of person they're looking for. And he knew their ages because they told them how old they were. And then it goes into quite graphic detail about what he received from them. And he described quite a lot of what he would do in detail. I'll leave you to go through that. And I think the real question was, when he was asked, did you know about Liberty? Did you know about Abigail? Did you ever meet Liberty? Did you ever meet Abigail? Did you ever interact? And very likely he denied this. And also very likely he may have deleted online artifacts linking himself to them. Now, something I found quite amusing, it's probably not good to be amused by anything in this case, but something I found difficult to believe. The grandmother of one of the victims said that she had never mentioned that she was interacting with this particular individual. Well, I doubt whether she would say so. It's something that does necessarily take place in secret. And that brings us to the seventh point. Bridgeman is unrecognizable even from up close. Why? Well, that's done on purpose. Think about the scenario of Keegan Klein. He's now...
Thanks a lot for that, Matt. So have you guys heard the story that actually the footage of Bridgeman is clearer and that there's actually more footage than we've seen? Have you guys heard about that? To be honest, I don't know what to make of it. I suspect it could be true, but I don't know whether it really takes you anywhere. I don't know whether that's also been released to the media to make the killer panic or make a mistake or whatever. But the fact is, Bridgeman, although there's video of him, it's strong evidence, but it wasn't strong enough. In other words, you can't say that's all we need, but it was very useful evidence because you can kind of go to, as we're doing right now, you can go to Richard Allen and say, okay, but could he be Bridgeman? And there's certain ways you can exclude him or include him. And so one of the things you want to look at is any of the clothing that you see in that footage, was any of that clothing found at his home? And also, didn't his wife recognize any of that clothing? What happened to that clothing? The hat, the boots, everything. Nature Lover says, I think they have more, as they always do. Helena says, isn't the Bridgeman photo taken by the girls? Yep. Wolfie says, I heard a whole 43 seconds. Someone else says there's more talking. And as far as I know, you can actually do voice analysis that is almost like a signature as well. I think you would agree with me that not a lot of people talk the way that I do. The uniquely nasal aspect to my voice, and so on. Well, that is a kind of fingerprint as well. There's an audio signature as well. It's not like DNA evidence. It's not. I'm not actually sure if it's admissible in court, but it's definitely something you'd want to have a look at. Right. So anyway, let's continue.
Solicited their attention. They are going to meet. They've agreed to meet with him, and now he's going to be exposed for who he actually is. His appearance is going to be judged, and he's going to be found wanting. Right. And is it just me, or do both these images resemble the man of the moment? He's got a similar nose, especially. The sketch certainly shows someone who could be misconstrued as kind of masculine or strong, but it's.
So did you notice they are referred to Keegan Klein as the man of the moment? Well, he was the man of the moment a couple of months ago. Is Richard Allen the man of the moment? Doesn't feel like that. It feels like Richard Allen is the man, doesn't it? And this is the day, right?
Actually someone who's kind of overweight, right? You can see the side of the cheeks almost go into the neck, right? The width of the neck and the width of the face are similar, whereas with a lot of people, the face is bigger than the neck, right? In this case, the neck is about the same width. But there's a similar look to the nose. The mouth, I think.
So I'm not sure if I agree with that, Terry. I think one of the reasons you wouldn't release video or audio is because you don't want to play all your cards before trial, right? If you remember in the Chris Watts case, they didn't release the Ring doorbell footage quite early, until quite late. I think they only released it in February when they must have had it by August already. So I don't think it's a case that they don't have it. I think it's a case that certain things they keep in order to play those cards during a prosecution scenario.
It has got that downward slope, but it's a little bit narrower in terms of photos of Keegan Klein. Then if you look at the photo, you can see that this is quite an overweight individual. It was, I guess, fairly cold, but you can see underneath that he's quite a overweight fellow, and he's hiding that overweightness under bulky clothing and a hat, right? And that brings us to the 8th point. When Liberty and Abigail realized what Keegan really looked like, well, he wasn't going to be allowed to. It wasn't going to be voluntary, put it that way. So obviously fantasy can only go so far before it escalates until finally the final step is reality. A titillating final step for one is a fatal final step for the other. Can you imagine how meeting in the flesh creates an untenable situation where the perpetrator is simultaneously exposed, but the victim's also ensnared? So what's the bottom line? Is there direct evidence linking Klein to the crime? And direct evidence would be something like DNA or boot prints matching a pair of his shoes, same size, or phone data, pings and so forth. And I'm assuming there isn't. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this attempt to focus on the social media side of things. I think that evidence.
So I think very near to the end of all of this is an admission that I didn't think it was Keegan Klein, or that I thought that there was something limited regarding what they knew or didn't know, right? So before we continue with this, I want to just take you through a couple of the headlines that have come out. There's that one from Law and Crime. Suspect reportedly under arrest in connection with Indiana's long unsolved Delphi murders, right? Under arrest. And then there's actually that reference. Okay. And then there's this from the Daily Beast. Today is the day. It's just, I think I just need to log in there. I am subscribed. Just give me a second. Today is the day. Cops reportedly nabbed the man in connection to Delphi teens' murders. And he was booked into jail early Friday morning. I think I read somewhere else that it was noon. Then it says they plan to announce a significant update 10 a.m. Monday, right? You've even got that response from the family. Just now, grateful I am. No comments for now. Any questions, please refer to the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office. There is tentatively a press conference at 10 a.m. Today is the day. That's quite a big statement, I think. Okay. That, I think, will be the emblematic image of this case going forward, this particular image. Don't you guys think? And one wonders where that was posted, you know. Yeah, that's also interesting. No one has heard his name before this, right? Andrew says this is not long unsolved. Zircon says, I can't wait till Monday. I think many feel the same way. Okay. Let's have a look at a couple of other headlines. There's this one. Ricky Allen held in Delphi murders, 5 facts you need to know. Well, that's actually where you see that. That's the original image. Can you see in that image, they've blurred out her face. That is, that's good practice. That is the way the media needs to be respectful. So I really support that. That's really the source of that image. So here are a couple of points from the article. Liberty's sister tweeted that at a press conference that today is the day, right? Liberty's sister. That's the tweet, Kelsey. And then that's giving the location where he lived relative to the bridge trail. We've already looked at that. There you also see the daughter's face blurred out. If you see social media not doing that, you should maybe say something. But I do think the fact that he's married with a daughter is how he was also maybe thinking about young girls as well, through thinking about his own daughter, which must horrify him and his family. So someone did say the bodies were moved and staged. How, we don't know, and maybe that'll be revealed on Monday. We don't know how they were moved or staged, but I guess that'll be found out. So there again is a picture of him. You can see his wife's face not in there. There have been other suspects over the years. And I mean, all of that sort of takes you to is this the guy? It does feel like that, doesn't it? It does feel like it's been a long road with lots of suspects, but this guy, based on what's been happening, what family have been saying, it is odd. Why are they waiting until Monday? Maybe it's to put together a package of certain evidence information. Maybe it's to actually bring out that some more of that video that we haven't seen before. Who knows? Who knows what it's about? Sweet as pie is just my opinion, but things have picked up No, totally. I mean, there was not that long ago, they were looking in the river because the river level had subsided so much. And you sort of felt, well, is something going to come out of that, right? Songbird says, now I'm going to side-eye my pharmacists. Well, they might side-eye one another as well. Snookerman says, have any law-abiding people been accused? Yeah, that's a really good point. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like all the suspects have been kind of scummy people, which is maybe why it took so long to find him. Layla says, moved and staged, but I believe moved within the crime scene. Not there yet says to put all their ducks in order and have all their personnel available. Yeah. Jody says, any photos of him 5 years ago, beard change? You might want to look at this particular video. So it's not that one. Do I have that other video? Where is that video that I've got? Let's see if I can help you out here. I think this is from quite a while ago. Doesn't he look quite a lot younger? And he doesn't look very happy to be sprung on in terms of, you know, being recorded. He doesn't look terribly happy, does he? Okay, yeah, I agree with that. Okay. Should we go back to the video? I think we've got about 5 minutes left of that. Where is it?
Is quite strong, it's quite good, but it's still not kind of a smoking gun. The fact that the authorities have refused to disclose the autopsy results of Liberty German and Abigail Williams always bothered me. I suspect they haven't because they haven't wanted to disclose how much evidence is lacking, or put another way, how little evidence was actually found. I could be wrong about that.
So I do think I was right about that. I think we are looking at a sanitized crime scene, an unusually sanitized crime scene. And why is that? Well, because we're dealing with someone who is used to working in a sterile environment, used to the idea of sterility. You must remember, for someone to want to work in a pharmacy situation means that they are also feeling, well, I think I'm the right guy for this job because I am clinical, right? And it seems like certain aspects of the crime were clinical in terms of getting rid of evidence, but it seems like other aspects were very not clinical. For example, that there was a lot of blood on the scene. That's not clinical. That's not clean. Terry says, I want to thank you all for your intelligent, critical questions and comments. Thanks for that. Okay, let's continue.
Bear in mind, there's also water nearby, and the water could have been used to wash the victims, right? It may also have been used to drown the victims. We don't know, because we still don't know the full extent of the autopsy results. On the other hand, if the sort of attack occurred that one imagines, how on earth could there be absolutely no DNA evidence? Also, if he's the guy, why has
Okay, so that's definitely a possibility there that there could be no DNA evidence. One way for there to be no DNA is if the perpetrator wore some of those surgical gloves, right? And you actually know that we know that Chris Watts also had some of those blue nitrile gloves, and there was negligible DNA, certainly in terms of the Watts home was pretty much a sanitized crime scene. So how can you not leave any DNA while using those gloves? And you would imagine that pharmacists would be more aware of that sort of thing than most people, right? That's one answer. The other answer is that pharmacists are, I would imagine, are quite aware of things like cleaning agents, bleach, and disinfectants in order to keep a clean workspace. So one does wonder whether the bridge guy was actually carrying any of that in his clothing. The other thing that I think is interesting to think about is if you say there's no DNA, you might say the perpetrator may not have left his own DNA. Besides thinking about if there's a sexual element to the case, the flip side is, well, it's not necessarily him leaving his DNA. It could also be him taking their DNA and taking it home with him and burying it in his backyard. That's the other side to it.
Hasn't it been made official yet? Why hasn't it been announced? I think it's about to be announced. I've just got a feeling. I could be wrong. I think it's about to be announced. It's about to be made official. The cops are being careful, in my view. Perhaps they're almost there, but there are a few final loose ends they want to tie up. And social media is quite a tricky area. It's tricky to verify things absolutely. And someone on the Banfield show made quite a good case that the social media companies don't always cooperate with law enforcement. They've got their reasons, but that makes it very difficult. And so that might be the last sort of hurdle that is frustrating this investigation. And so, given these loose ends that are in the realm of social media, I think they don't have much choice but to play open cards with the public. And so they're reaching out to the public, and this may be where we are now. And so we know that investigators seized 6 devices from Klein. That's a lot. It shows that this is investigators into this particular case. And that included smartphones, a tablet, and an iPod Touch as part of their 2017 search warrant. And I think what that suggests was that he must have had something like 4 smartphones, right? The iPod Touch was last used in May of 2015, which shows that there was sexual behavior prior to 2017, and we know there was the same thing after, right, which led to his arrest ultimately. And what they're finding is that all of these devices are located throughout Indiana, places like Hammond, Royal Center, Kokomo, Indianapolis, Galveston, Bunker Hill, Monterey, and so on. And I think what they're looking for is something that is centered in Delphi, right? And so what the police want now perhaps is more circumstantial evidence that Klein was active in Delphi, but besides that, if he met anyone in Delphi and how and where that played out. That'll just give a sense of reinforcement to what they feel they already know. And so some of the questions posed to the public were, did you communicate with this profile? When did you communicate? How did you communicate? Which social media platform did you use? Did Anthony Schatz meet you? They don't provide his actual name. And did Anthony Schatz obtain your address, right? And then have you got any saved images? And that's quite a crucial thing. Do you have saved images of the profile, I guess, but perhaps, did you ever meet in person? Do you have saved conversations? And that is also going to provide a sense of reinforcement to be more certain that this profile and this individual are one and the same. So what do you think? Will participants who shared compromising footage of themselves come forward? Well, given what we know that footage is, I doubt it. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, so that is essentially it. There is another headline I wanted to share with you guys. This headline from today, major shock twist, major Delphi Snapchat murder update, arrest of Richard Allen. And then there's also this from Fox 59. Man booked into Carroll County Jail in connection with Delphi murders. Okay. I think, what did I want to look at here? That. Okay. Yeah, so is this the man? Let's have a look again at the poll. I see it's down to 77%. So 11% are saying it could be someone else. And Keegan Klein is up to 9%, possibly because I played that video about him. Ron Logan down to 3%, but an overwhelming majority, more than 3/4, saying Richard Allen. Richard Allen is Bridge Guy. We will find out. We will eventually find out. Okay, so I can't believe this is almost 4 hours. I thought it was going to be a 1 hour live. And I think Timmy thought so too. I'm going to just wrap up with some of your final comments. Thanks very much, chat, for your questions and your thoughts. You definitely made this a very interesting, a lot more interesting than without that. So thanks very much to you guys. I must also apologize for being quite fuzzy during this. I'm on medication. I'm not feeling terribly good. And I sort of woke up and had to deal with this. I did know about it before I went to sleep, but I'm kind of not firing on all cylinders. So sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Nature Lover. Thanks for that. Glad you enjoyed it. Let's look at some of your comments. Kay says, he may have felt powerless at work as an older man working with much younger. I think that's definitely something to think about. I think his work environment, but bear in mind, was he working at that point? The other thing is he could have been studying and mixing with students in that sense. That could also have been a factor. The other thing is, bear in mind, he's got to answer to the pharmacist. A tech's got to answer to the supervisor. And so his boss may have also made him feel emasculated, right? I also get a sense, and this is my personal view, is that if his wife is a vet, then you get the feeling his job, and I could be wrong on this, but you get the feeling his job may be kind of a bit lower on the scale, because my thought is that vets are really smart kind of animal doctors, right? And he is, I think, on a lower level than that. So you would imagine that his wife would earn more than him, and that he may feel very, very emasculated. Doesn't that make sense? States on the case is too bad they weren't able to do that. Okay, yeah, true. It does feel like we're on the brink of a big case that may be solved. In fact, I wanted to put the word solved exclamation mark in the title, but you sort of feel like, let's make sure. Mel Stiller says, being a pharmacy tech, Alan would know all about keeping his workstation. Yeah. I think we get a lot of insight just through his work role. Okay. Deborah, as always, you bring us quality and quantity. Thank you very much for your, thanks a lot for that. Okay. Yeah, they are very highly educated. I'm just not quite sure exactly what her role is. Not 100% sure. Yeah, she could also be a vet tech. I'm not 100% sure. But I'm just saying that there's a possibility that she may be higher on the hierarchy. She may earn a bigger salary than he does, but something to look into. Andrew says, was this man hiding from the public eye? I don't think he was hiding. I do think he was camera shy. I think he was not happy to be seen on social media, but otherwise hiding in plain sight. A lot of smart people there. Okay, I think that's about it. They do have an ample supply as well. Okay. Let's look at some of your last comments. Nicholas says, apparently the police only went to his house because a neighbor called to report stolen items and they happened to stumble on something. I don't know that. I don't quite know exactly what the connection is. And by the way, if you're watching this on replay and you've got a link to that digging up of his backyard, I believe it's on Facebook, please put that link in the comments, because that's something I tried to find, I couldn't find. Helena says, Nick, please take care, take the weekend off for you. I don't know if I'm going to be doing too much more coverage, but maybe you'll see me again on Monday. Thanks a lot for that. Okay. Yeah, Malster says, good night, Peaches. Good night, definitely. So I just want to thank all of you here, especially mods. I know Terry's been pretty active, but to everyone else as well. Sharon, I think you went to bed a bit earlier. Thanks a lot to the members, Helena, Nisi, but also to some new faces that we're seeing here. Also, thanks a lot for the super chats. If you are watching this on replay and you found it worthwhile, you're welcome to hit the thanks button. Yeah, so that's it. We're going to see what happens on Monday, and obviously we await some new insights, new revelations in this really high-profile case that I certainly was starting to feel a little bit unhappy about. It felt like Keegan Klein something was happening, and then inexplicably nothing happening for a while. So, it feels like certain big things are taking place in true crime, with a Kristen Smart case, with this case, even in the Suzanne Morphew case to a certain degree. So it feels like there's a little bit of hope returning to true crime. And so we look at what's going to happen on Monday. I think we are all going to be tuning in for that. I will be covering that. So if you're interested in my analysis, watch this space. Cool. Okay, so that is it from my side. Take care, guys. I'll take care of myself. You guys take care of yourselves. And I'll see you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay healthy, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.